Okay, good afternoon from the UK. Let's just sort out a bit of housekeeping quickly. That's it. Right, that's the housekeeping done. Right. Uh, uh, those who'll be watching this live stream later, you'll notice that there's a few bits of housekeeping. I'm going to say this now if anyone decides to join with some live stream housekeeping. To save the live streams from the trolls we've had recently, you've got to be subscribed for an hour before you can comment. Apologies for that if you are a new subscriber. However, one of the recent live streams was hijacked by some pretty distasteful trolling, basically. So that's a bit of housekeeping. I know it's a bit frustrating for newer viewers. Obviously, you want to get comments in and things, bits and pieces like that. Um, but it's designed to protect the stream and help the moderators a little bit because while we are a smaller channel than some, the moderators I have selected, there's a reason why they're moderators. They've been long-standing followers of the channel, and you know, while they ask questions and they participate, they also are keeping the chat clean. There was some pretty distasteful stuff a couple of days ago, so I'm trying to put a stop to it as best I can. I've reported a lot of it to the powers that be in at Google, and it's really frustrating because this is a regular thing that happens for a lot of YouTubers. Good afternoon, everyone. There's a couple of topics that I want to start with. Obviously, I watched two of the four FA Cup. I watched three of the four FA Cup quarter-finals, all Premiership semi-finals. Chelsea played Palace. I think Palace have a good chance of upsetting the odds there. And Man City Liverpool is the other semi-final. So we've got two derbies basically for the FA Cup semi-finals this year. I think Palace for me are the dark horses. They for me are the dark horses. The way they put Everton away, they don't do that a year ago or 2 years ago. They really put Everton to the sword. A lot of players have upped their game. It's not just the Wilfred Zaha show at Crystal Palace. So I was really entertained by some of the goals scored. I felt Southampton got their game plan right for the first 65 minutes against Man City, and then the subs changed the game. With the Six Nations, there are some coaches under a lot of pressure. Eddie Jones, the RFU have come out and said they're backing him. He is under a lot of criticism. He's faced a lot of criticism. He is under a lot of pressure leading into the World Cup. Gregor Townsend, another middling performance in the Six Nations. They're not the worst. They're not the best. They're not the most consistent either. Gregor Townsend. Surprisingly, with Gregor Townsend, he's got the highest win percentage of a Scotland coach in the professional era since 1995. That is something I find very, very interesting. Highest win percentage, and they have won the old Five Nations in that period in 1999. So I find that a bit interesting, but he's still under pressure because I don't think Scotland are making the all-round strides forward. And of course, Wayne Pivac, I think, is the coach under the most pressure with Wales. So that's three coaches under a lot of pressure, each for different reasons. And we'll have to see how it plays out. I think the issue is, however, and I keep going back to this with England, and it's not just down to team selection for the players. It's the style of play. It's the discipline. It's the penalty count. It's too high. The ruck and the maul area, they're coming out second best in collisions. I think Ireland and France, and to a certain extent Italy are in the second half, and Scotland really showed up. I think all the nations at various points in the five games showed up the collision area. They have the slowest ruck speed out of the Six Nations. That's something that I've noted. They did, put the effort in. They were second best, but the effort was there, and the effort was there against Ireland after the red card. But the problem is their average score. You take the Italy game out of it, they're not scoring enough points, and the penalty count is too high. So they're not giving themselves that buffer where okay, if they go down to 14 men or they've got that buffer, the penalty count's getting a bit high, so they're losing a little bit of territory or position, pitch positioning, but they've got the buffer there. They're not scoring as many points as they used to. Obviously, injuries to key players, I think, is a concern. But Eddie Jones has been there a while, much like Warren Gatland was at Wales, but he's had less success than Warren Gatland did at Wales. Now, there are some saying he should go. And they are fair criticisms. I think they are legitimate criticisms. For me, the deficiencies of England's game have been long standing long before Eddie Jones got there. That's my opinion on that one. I think the three nations that can come out of the Six Nations with the most positivity: France, obviously winning the Grand Slam. Ireland, in the end, didn't lose too badly to France. Ireland and France, um, it was that game that proved pivotal. Both those nations, I think, are very happy where they are right now. They both come off defeating the All Blacks in the autumn. Italy have broken that drought and they won away, which is even more important. They don't do that very often in the Six Nations, and they won very well against Wales. They wanted it more. They wanted it more. And you can see the emotion and what it means to players. And when you've got people like Sam Warburton saying Wales, Italy aren't good enough, they should be relegated out, his own nation got beaten, embarrassingly so, from a winning position with 10 minutes remaining. They could dictate, kick log into the corner, make them have a defensive line out 5-10 meters out from their try line, and they have to play out. In the end, they kick down the throat of the winger. He passes to the fullback, and the rest is history. Those two players combined for the try. And when you've got front row and second row forwards who've done big minutes, defending in the wing, centre wing channel, in the wide areas, that is just unacceptable. At least have one outside back out there. No, we're going to have a prop against a fullback, and a fullback who's been proving all tournament that he will run at you. He will run and run and run. He will find space. And it doesn't matter, that the winger's caught the ball, no pressure on the kick chase, has time to go, there's my fullback. There's no pressure on my pass. I could pop pass it to him. Time to make the pass under no pressure. The fullback has got time to see the disorganised kick chase, pick a gap, pick another gap. Oh, right, there's a gap there. Right, there's the prop, bang. On the outside, does the winger, does the fly half, pops the pass in, under the posts. I'm sorry, at that level, if you are going to kick long and put pressure with a kick chase, you've got to come up as a line. Doesn't matter if it's a slow line or a fast line. You have to come up as a line. They came up disjointed and at a weird angle, which just allows the fullback and the winger to create their play, link up and go down, and go 95 metres to score the try. Sorry, at this level, international level, even tier 2 and tier 3 nations don't do that. That is how bad Wales were at game management. And yeah, Italy, this is where the Georgia match for Italy will be important, because people say they shouldn't be in the Six Nations. They're going to beat Georgia. They're going to beat Spain and Romania handsomely as well. They're going to probably promote some of the under-20s and give them a run out, bit of squad depth, bit of squad rotation, and go with the same game plan of high energy defence, which is what a lot of nations are now doing. That get in your face, blitz defence, where you go up in a line of 3 or 4. You've got the outside back, you're in the back row forwards, the two centres are in your face. The winger will shoot up going for the intercept, but also put pressure on the pass. And then you've got the fullback and the scrum half just in position. So if there is the winger shot up or the centre shot up, you slot in that hole. That's how they defend. And their fitness and their commitment and their passion is there. Wales lack that. England lack that as well. So the three nations that have come up best, one finishes at the bottom, one gets a Grand Slam, one comes second. The ones in the middle, the ones that were more was expected and didn't live up. But yeah, no, Italy having a Northern Hemisphere tour, I think it'd be nice to see Italy play Argentina, quite frankly, in a summer tour. I think that would be really the two big Latin nations going head to head. I think that would be brilliant. Or Italy touring Argentina and Uruguay. I think that would be really, really a good thing. Not only for Italy and Argentina as tier 1 nations, but Uruguay, who want to get into that kind of reckoning of we're regularly at World Cups now, we're the most dominant of the Americas after Argentina, we're all professional, and that would be a good testing point for Uruguay going into the World Cup, because they qualified easily. They need to play better opposition so they can improve. I would love to see the Uruguay, Argentina, Italy tri-nations kind of summer. That would be brilliant. That would be absolutely fantastic. And of course, you've got a big Italian-American community in Canada and the US. That would be fantastic for Italy doing like a tri-nations against the US and Canada, because Canada wants to bounce back after missing out the World Cup. The US aren't guaranteed to get to the World Cup. They want to keep improving with this Major League Rugby league they have. The Uruguayans are the ones who benefited the most. That would be a good litmus test for these tier 2 nations that are developing. is to play one of the weaker tier one nations, but a tier one nation that used to be in their level, and it'd be a good litmus test to develop that that second tier into, okay, we can compete with some tier one nations. That's how I would do it. I understand the cash flow behind having the big tier one nations from Northern Hemisphere versus the Southern Hemisphere, but Romania, Spain, and Georgia are trying to qualify for the World Cup. That's a good warm up for them playing a team that's going to be at the World Cup, who are playing at a higher level with more professional players. That is a good litmus test. But I understand the money. I think I wouldn't say Uruguay should be classed as a tier one, but they're definitely a high tier two nation. They've beaten the US and Canada. Um, they're their nearest South American rivals are Chile, Brazil. They're also developing with the Olympics program they had for Rio. I think it's a good litmus test for these tier two and tier three nations to play. You know, against it doesn't have to be a full strength Italian side, but you have to remember that the players are playing in Europe at a higher professional standard than in the Americas with Major League Rugby. They are playing at that slightly higher professional standard. Um, so that's a good way of saying we can get better. Um, it would be nice if they do like a summer tour of Argentina and Uruguay. I think it'd be beneficial for all three nations. I really do. Maybe touring the US and Canada because the Italian American population, and give back to the community. But World Rugby, they're the ones who come up with these ideas. The unions go to World Rugby saying, okay, who do we want to have touring this year? Um, I mean, Italy have played South African Samoa in a Tri Nations format about a decade ago. That was quite good fun actually watching that. So it's difficult. The international calendar is difficult because you've got those nations that have already qualified for the World Cup, um, and then those that have to qualify. So there's already automatic qualifiers. It's a difficult one, but you want to develop that second and third level to be more competitive. And you want professionalism to grow around the world, and that's where I think World Rugby, formerly the IRB, have got professionalism wrong. Yes, Richard Agar has left Leeds Rhinos with immediate effect. I did see that this morning when I was at work having a break on the old social medias. I haven't read the full statement. All I know is it's with immediate effect. I think Leeds are going through a Leeds aren't the team they were. And the issue with English rugby league at the moment has been well discussed, not just on this channel, but by a lot of um, media commentators, social media, other YouTubers. There is an issue. There's lots of problems with the Super League and the Championship and League One. There's a lot of problems, a lot of financial difficulties. Very few clubs are actually in profit. A lot of them are facing liquidation. That there is a big threat of looming over the whole thing. Well, bearing in mind, it took about 15 years for Argentina to finally join the Tri Nations and become the Rugby Championship in the Southern Hemisphere. So, and Italy, a similar length of time in the 80s and 90s to get into the Six Nations. And it is frustrating when the powers that be try their best to hamper the development. And Augustine Pichot was one of the big driving forces behind getting Argentina to where they are today. And he got frustrated with the direction World Rugby was taking. Yet Bill Beaumont's now nicked a lot of his ideas that he on his platform, which is what most politicians do. But yeah, South Africa. I think Italy would benefit more by playing. I think a tour in the Southern Hemisphere against Uruguay and Argentina, like a little touring, like maybe two tests against Argentina, one test against Uruguay, maybe two tests against Uruguay, a test against Argentina. I think that would benefit them more. There's a connection between the three countries historically. I think that would be brilliant for the Latin American community and brilliant for Italian rugby as well. But again, it comes down to availability and fixturing it in the calendar. And it's all about the money. Now, I think Italy, Argentina definitely could bring in a lot of revenue, and Uruguay want to increase their revenue, their union at least. But it's TV. It's the TV companies that want to make the big money. It's a difficult one, but I would like to see like Japan, Italy play regularly. That'd be kind of cool. I think Japan and Italy are at a similar level. Japan, Uruguay, and Italy would be a real good matchup. I think Italy's forward pack would be too strong for Uruguay and Japan, but Japan play in a way where they use their weakness as a strength. They're very quick at scrum time. They're very quick at the ruck and the maul. They love a quick breakdown. Um, they play with a lot of pace, and Uruguay are trying to get to that level. So there are ideas you could throw around and try and come up with some solutions to some of the international problems. It's like the Lions tour. Is there a future for the Lions tour? Will we have a Lions tour in 3 years' time? What happened with the South African Lions tour and everything like that, the disaster that was in a certain aspect. Um, there are aspects to international rugby that do need looking at, and it's not just, and it's also the match day revenue sharing. That's another big thing for the match fees for players and how the revenue is split between the unions. I believe it should be a 50-50 split on the match day revenue. But the way it's balanced right now is wrong, and a lot of people are saying this. Have been saying for years. It's incorrect. It's not right. Um, but it is what it is. Is it too early to say that France too? I think it's a bit too early for France to be declared favourites. They've got to do a summer tour yet, and they've got to play Ultimate Internationals. So they've got a tour down under, and then they've got to have the down under teams have got a tour up here. And then we've got another Six Nations and then the warm-up matches for the World Cup. So I would say it's a bit early yet, but I still think there's room for improvement in this French side. And the same with the Irish. I think the difference between the Irish and the French is the French have made World Cup finals. The Irish have got stuck at the quarter-final stage. So, but I do think they are light years ahead of where the rest of Europe is. And that's the difference. Is where they're at. I think there is still room for improvement. I think the weakness with Ireland is that fly half, if below Johnny Sexton. The younger fly halves, or the backup fly halves, haven't had a lot of caps between them. And So if Johnny Sexton was to have, he's going to retire after the World Cup anyway. But if Johnny Sexton was to have any injury problems going into the tournament or get injured during the tournament, I think Ireland might have a few problems. Although when he didn't play, they were still pretty competent with Carberry and co. But it's getting those younger fly halves and inside centres, because he can play inside centre as well. It's that little bit more game time and get more caps. Do I think Hong Kong will ever qualify? Obviously, there's a lot of political issues with Hong Kong right now as well. I did watch the World Cup qualifiers for the previous World Cup, and there's still a long way to go for Hong Kong. A long, long way to go. But the political situation in Hong Kong is quite serious. There's a lot of implications there, and we hope the funding doesn't dry up. So there are other concerns other than sport in Hong Kong right now. Would I like to see a new nation? Like we've seen Portugal at the World Cup. Spain have been at a few. Um, would I like to see another new nation, get to a World Cup? Absolutely. We'll have to see what happens if they decide to expand the format, which is, I think, what is planned down the line, the expanded format. But this is the first World Cup without Canada, so and Chile are if the Chileans beat the US in their two-leg playoff this summer, that could be another new nation making its World Cup debut. Now, that speaks volumes for the development of the sport in the Tier 2 bracket. But I will say this, it does concern me with the decline in Canada and the stalling progress of the US. But Uruguay have improved massively, and they did deserve to qualify. They played better than the US in the head-to-head tests. They played better than Canada, so they deserve to be there. But the US seem to have stalled a little bit. Is there too much overseas talent in Major League Rugby? Is that stifling the development of the homegrown talent? I think every league needs to look at having quotas. I know that sounds a bit protectionist, but I have concerns that maybe some local talent's being held back because that marquee player's come in that plays the same position and already has international caps. I want to throw big money at a marquee player over a local junior who's gone through the system and he doesn't get enough game time. What does England need to do to improve? I think a new coach is needed at some point, whether it's before or after the World Cup. I don't think bringing a new coach in now may be the right idea. However, We don't know what the summer holds and the autumn. If it's a really bad summer and autumn, we may see a different change of from the RFU. A different voice may be needed. Maybe a new assistant coming, a new assistant coach in the attack or defence or strength and conditioning. Um, Maybe that could be required. I will say this: um, they have given the backing. I think Eddie Jones is under less pressure than Wayne Pivac. If Eddie Jones finished fifth, um, rather than third, I think he's under the most pressure as a head coach in the Six Nations. The issue for me is that Gregor Townsend, Scotland's form hasn't improved, it hasn't got worse. Certain aspects of their game have improved, and then the Ireland game came along, and that really undid a lot of their good defensive work, where they've been outscoring opponents and they've been winning their tight games that they would have lost. But they beat England in a tight game, lose to Wales in a tight game. So they they can't be. The issue with Scotland is consistency. I think Wayne Pivac is the coach under the most pressure. It will be interesting to see what happens in the summer. If Wales have a poor summer and then a poor autumn, um, then yeah, then I think the pressure builds. I think that the problem is rugby is not like international football. International rugby is a lot different. Um, the players are actually in international rugby union are limited with the amount of games they can play in a calendar year. There's actually rules in place limiting. I think it's 25 or 26 games a player can play in a 12-month period or something like that. So players actually ironically get to play less games than football or ice hockey or rugby league. So there's less game time to go. Right, this guy's an up and coming talent. He's been really impactful for this team and so you get to spend less time with your players. And if you're implementing new defence and new attack and new strength and conditioning systems, they normally work on a 4 or 5 year cycle. So I think Wayne Pivac and Eddie Jones are safe in the job for now. I think Gregor Townsend out of the three's under the least pressure because improvement has been there with Scotland. It's the results, it's the consistency in performance, not necessarily the consistency in scoring points and keeping the points out. Their points per game average has gone up. The points again going against average has gone down. So there's a positive indicators for the Scotland side. It's just getting that consistency where if they are going to lose, it's a bonus point, try bonus point, losing defeat. And if they're going to win, it's a try bonus point win. And it's all about keeping the same level of performance, win or lose. And I think that's the concern. In football, the Premier League, yeah, the last couple of months, the Championship, Premier League, League One, and League Two are going to be very, very interesting. The playoff hunt is hotting up in the lower divisions. The relegation fight is a bit tasty as well. Now, West Ham had a decent season last season as well. I think they're building something there. They are building something there. We'll see what happens in Conference League or Europa League. And Leicester have a very good chance to win the Conference League as well. So we may see a lot of European trophies ending up in English hands this season. I think they're above Spurs. I think Arsenal have had a little bounce back under Arteta. Arteta's won, obviously, the FA Cup with Arsenal. I think the issues with Arsenal are long-standing issues towards the end of Wenger's time in charge. And Unai Emery and now Arteta is player recruitment, player development, and the lack of expansiveness for them in the transfer market. Now they got a lot of transfers wrong in the last 10 to 15 years, and I think that's contributed to it. They've been very frugal in spending terms compared to other clubs, but Aubameyang leaving's actually helped Arsenal. But I think West Ham definitely on the up. But they need to back it up next season and show that this is not just 2 seasons of good form. This is consistent, competitive team they are putting on the field where they're qualifying for Europe. They're going lengthy distance in cup competitions. When they are in the European competitions, they take it seriously. The squad depth, investment. They have to be consistent and say we are now a top team. They've got good players there. But they've always had a good junior system, and a good youth system. So they've always unearthed talent in the East End of London, Kent and Essex way. They've always unearthed talent. They so well, they've not been as successful as they should have been or could have been historically. Um, they've always unearthed talent that either has gone on to great things within the game, um, or if they end up leaving West Ham, they still win trophies, develop. But they are a bit of a development ground as well. But I think they want to keep hold of the talent that they're developing now for longer and have success with that talent. Um, I think. Do I think the Great Britain Rugby League Lions will ever tour again after the shambles of the last tour a year and a half ago? Um, there are question marks over eligibility rules, the quality of the team we can put together, uh, the quality of the Super League, quite frankly. So, in that regard, I hope that it becomes more of a regular thing. Um, but with rugby league finances in the UK as they are, it may be a while. But after the shambles of the last tour, that I think has left a bit of bitter taste in the mouth, and it makes the RFL and the Super League look really shambolic. PNG, that wasn't even a good PNG side. Um, really embarrassed them. Really embarrassed them. So I don't know. I don't know where the RFL go, and I don't know where the Super League goes. There needs to be structural reform. There's too many layers of governance. There's too many voices in the room. I think the game needs to come under a single umbrella. They need to work out positive investment, and I think we'll have to see how the free-to-air coverage continues and how what the viewership figures are like, what the engagement, audience engagement is like. Um, the Challenge Cup as well, the engagement with that. But it is also important that the game continues to grow in the south and the southwest of England and the Midlands. I think that's the key bit this World Cup should be bringing. And I'm concerned they've played safe with a lot of the stadiums they've selected. Now, I know some of the venues have changed since that initial list was put out. The pandemic has had an impact, and certain stadiums under development weren't necessarily completed on time. But it would have been nice to see games in the Midlands, more games in the South and the Southwest, really take the game, sport on the road around, and even have a game in Scotland or a game in Wales, maybe a game in Belfast. Just take it outside of the M62, that corridor. Take it, you know, on the road to locations where it hasn't been played at a high level or there isn't, and really get the interest and say that this is a World Cup. They've got to market the brand. They've got to market the product. We've got the best NRL talent coming over to our shores in October to show the world what they're capable of. And I tell you now, Tonga, New Zealand, and Australia will be three of the four semi-finalists. I have no doubt. Maybe Fiji, with depending on certain things going their way, certain squad selections, and certain players being fit and available. That could be your four semi-finalists. England might not even make the semi-finals, but the best talent is coming over to our country, and the best talent plays in the best league, and it's not here. Conference League is like it's the UEFA Trophy, so winning it will be good, especially with them not winning a cup in like 35 years. It's 32 years, but okay. You're saying that the Great Britain Lions should play New South Wales and Queensland. That would be tasty, actually. I would actually definitely sell organs to go see that. There have been question marks over state of origin, what time of year it should be played. Should play end of season, mid season. And that debate's raged since 1980. It would be nice to see the GB Lions take on the Queensland and New South Wales sides. I'm completely in agreement with that. But then you've got to get so many stakeholders on board. And of course, when you do that, obviously there's a state of origin, the rep round window, basically. Because they got rid of city country origin, which I thought was a poor decision at the time under Todd Greenberg in 2017. I felt that was a poor decision undertaken by the then CEO Todd Greenberg. and it was one of the decisions he was heavily criticised for. Was scrapping city country origin, because can you imagine, instead of taking on the two state sides, having a series against New South Wales country, New South Wales City, and then Queensland City and Queensland countrysides. Those rep teams. That would be in as like as warm up tour games for, let's say, playing a match against Queensland and then playing a match against New South Wales. And then, like say, a Prime Minister's 13 normally play PNG. Okay, the Prime Minister's 13 play the GB touring side. The issue is then there are players who play in the NRL who are English or eligible for England, Scotland, Wales, or Ireland, who play in the Prime Minister's 13. So that would be an interesting one. You could have like a Maori 13, the Indigenous All Stars, have a GB side play against an Indigenous and Maori All Stars, like Tri Series. That would be really. There are a lot of ideas to put on the table before they play a Test series against the Aussies. But of course, the game has changed since the 70s and 80s, and it's more professional. So that you couldn't do it all in one tour. You would have to do it over multiple tours. However, think of the marketing of a GB Lions, so not England or England Australia, but a touring rep side playing against a Maori All Star, Indigenous All Star, a Prime Minister's 13, a New South Wales City Country team, or a Queensland City Country team, or both, and then the State of Origin team. So it's not classed as a proper Great Britain versus Australia or England Australia. That I think could do wonders for the game, not only here but over there. Could do absolute wonders. You could do it as like as a little series in the warm up to warm up for the World Cup. I mean, you would have to figure out the scheduling and how to fit it in the league schedules and how to fit it in the rep rounds, as they're called, because there are internationals played during the rep rounds. The Anzac Day test, which is really important for Australia and New Zealand for their culture, their heritage, what it means. You have There are options on the table. I mean, we've seen Summit Series in ice hockey where the Soviet Red Army team, so the Soviet Union, played a select number of NHL teams, including Philadelphia, Boston, Montreal, the Rangers. You saw multiple where they would play multiple, professional NHL sides back in the 70s and the 80s during the height of the Cold War. A lot of these things have been done before in different sports. The Barbarians format in rugby union, it, it is great, and it always gets that is for the fans. It's not necessarily for TV, but that is for the match going fans. It is just the Harlem Globetrotters, for example. That is purely for the fans, and it's purely for the entertainment, and say that this is basically the best of the best playing each other without being a formal test match. So the idea has been around for a while, but the powers that be don't seem to market themselves very well. I mean, the NRL as a product markets itself, but the powers that be, these ideas get put on the table and they're thrown on the cutting table floor, as it so to speak. They're chucked in the waste paper basket bin because, ironically, they don't sell as well on TV, according to the TV networks, because there's no rivalry there. But it basically watching the Harlem Globetrotters of rugby league. So like that could be what you do in the end of season internationals. You just don't have the internationals, but you have these all star teams and because I think fans will want to see that. The best of the best going at it for 80 minutes, let's say 3-game series or whatever. That would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. Whether it happens or not, there needs to be a bit more uniformity within rugby league as well. And rugby league is a sport that has too many governing bodies, and not enough cooperation between both the Super League and the NRL, and not enough cooperation between the international rugby league, and that's what I find most frustrating. How good do you think this France team is, who's won the Grand Slam compared to other Grand Slam winners? I think they're far more entertaining now. Whether they are as good as previous teams, each era is different, so it's very hard to compare. And to do a Grand Slam is very difficult. To do a clean sweep is exceptionally difficult. Um, Even the All Blacks all time have only got I think a 75 to 80% win ratio, win record out of all tests played in a given period. So let's say you play 10 or 12 tests a year, they'll win nine. They do lose some, and they're actually losing more now than they were before. The All Blacks, I think, have only gone one or two. I think the longest win streak. I don't know if it was the All Blacks or South Africa, but one of them had like 17 tests unbeaten or something ridiculous. And very few teams get into double figures. Even the All Blacks will win, let's say, 10, 12, 13, and then they'll lose the 14th test. Even the All Blacks. It's just the uniform. That's it. It's just their kit is all black. Um, it's their nicknames. The Springboks is the logo, obviously, for South Africa. The Wallabies is their logo. The All Blacks is because their original kit was just no sponsorship. The colour black was the kit, shorts, socks, the whole lot. There was no white stripe. So the original kit they played with was actually all black. um, they were one of the last rugby union international nations outside the World Cup to have sponsorship on their jerseys as well. That, and that's simply because New Zealand Rugby Union was actually running out of money, and they needed to make more money, so they had to eventually go to the corporate sponsors to fix some of their cash flow problems they had. But yeah, um, yeah, they've had sponsors. I think AIG are their sponsors at the moment. One of the banking firms. Yeah, I think it is AIG. And I tell you now, like they are a fabulous. Their player, their talent spotting, their development, their organisation, their skill set, the structures. It's rugby. It doesn't matter if it's union or league. Is a religion in New Zealand. It's a religion, um, and they have too much talent coming out of such a small nation, and a lot of it goes to waste. There's a lot of players um, who don't end up really making professional grade in either code because there's too much talent. There's not enough. There's too much. They are the Harlem Globetrotters, I think, of rugby union. But in recent years, there's been a few wobbles, and they're not as dominant, I don't think, as they used to be. I think the team that they're putting on the field now is not on the same level as previous teams that we have seen. Um, and I've met some great All Blacks who've worn the jersey. I've met the late great Jonah Lomu. I've met the late great Jerry Collins. Um, I I can tell you now, the sport for them is like a religion. It's a lifestyle choice. Um, they are the best for a reason. Now, at the moment, they're number three in the world. That's one of their lowest world rankings, I think, in over 15 years. The Springboks are still top. France are now second. That's for New Zealand. That is not acceptable. And there will be a review at the New Zealand Rugby Union about why have we slipped two places in the last 4 years. Why are we now third on the all-time rankings right now? On the world rankings right now, as the coefficient works. Why are we not one or two? Why are we third? Why is there a European nation ahead of us? That's how perfectionist they are. They don't accept failure. They are always driven to improve as well. That's what's scary about them. They're always driven to do better than the year before, better than the last Test match. They even like the great Dan Carter, the great Carlos Spencer. They were always driven to get better, even as their careers went on. They were never satisfied with the level. They always wanted to get to that next level. Um, I didn't watch the F1. I didn't even know who won the race, to be honest. I had some stuff I had to deal with in the evening. I had to go. My neighbour upstairs, my friend. Um, I had a few things to drop off to him, like work related stuff, because he works in construction. I work on in sanitation. We have to wear like high visibility clothing and all that safety gear. And I had some old uniform that would fit in. We're basically helping each other out by saving each other money. And so I didn't watch the F1 yesterday. I was more focused on the football and the rugby league and the rugby union over the weekend. For me, F1. Well, this is what's interesting. There is now, with the new regulations and the cars struggling with the bounce, the vibration bounce, with the new aerodynamics. Mercedes, their car's not great. I think we're going to have a very. I think it's the first race under the new regs. Let's see what the racing's like on a European circuit, like Spa. For Spa or Monza would be really interesting to see because they're very fast flowing circuits. Well, Monza's just flat out with a few chicanes and a few, parabolicas. But Spa, I think, is going to be the race where we are going to see what these new regulations are all about. In my opinion, that is a fast flowing circuit with undulations, off camber corners, and you go like Eau Rouge, Jesus, and like going through Eau Rouge flat out in the new regs will be very interesting to see how the cars perform. Um, uh, does the hacker win? Okay, for me, Dan, what I want you to watch is the 2007 Samoan Tonga pre-match, their version of the SIP. What's the hacker is the Maori term now. The Polynesian nations all have their own traditional victory or pre-war dance, as they call it. Watch the 2007 Samoa Tonga. They want to kill each other. And when I say they want to kill each other, that was one of the most violent games of rugby union, international level, I've ever seen. There were many players sent off. It was a brutal encounter, but one of the most passionate, the Samoan and the Tongans simultaneously. That, for me, spine tingling. It's on YouTube. Type in Samoa Tonga 2007 Rugby World Cup hacker face off. It's on YouTube. You will have your spine will be tingling. There you can see the aggression and the hate. And I want to say hate, the actual adrenaline, the passion in their eyes. You can see there's the intensity, the anger. They don't like each other, and they really went out to hurt each other. And when I say hurt each other, they're some of the things you would see in that format replay are classed as GBH. If that happened on a Friday night, I say a local sports bar, you're not getting done just for drunk and disorderly, but you're getting done for. I don't know what the New York state law is for beating crap out of someone, but battery, assault and battery, second degree. We're talking 5-6 years in prison, and I'm not joking. We're talking some serious jail. If that was the game has changed since 2007. I'm going to say that now. There are rule changes now. We take more concern over concussions now. There's different tackle techniques now. Certain tackles back then were legal. They're not now. Even then, the tackles and the hits going in were against the rules. The brutality of it, and it's the pre-match hackers. Well, I'm going to call it the hacker. I know there's actually they have different terms because New Zealand, that's the hacker. For Tonga, it's different because they're a different Polynesian nationality, and Samoa, it's different again. Fiji's the Sipi Tau, but Samoa and Tonga, their ones have different names. And I tell you now, I think they're more intimidating than the All Black hacker. It depends. It can actually motivate you as the opposition. I've seen, if you watch the Indigenous Maori All Stars match, that one fired them up, and there was some brutal contact in the last couple of years in the All Stars NRL All Stars games. There was a Samoa Tonga Rugby League International where it just turned into pure violence for 80 minutes. It's all about, yeah, you want to intimidate the opposition. But you, as the opposition, you can either, if you are one of the Polynesian Maori cultures, you have your right to respond with your war dance haka, and that can pump you up as well. And then it's just in your face. It is just pure brutality. I think another good one is the 2003 New Zealand Tonga haka face-off. While the result is one-way win for the All Blacks over Tonga, that that was that was simultaneous as well. They were, and I tell you, some of the contact in that game, regardless of the result, there was some real brutal hits going in. They did not um, hold back in the first 15, 20 minutes. There were players going off injured. And I watched that game live and I was feeling physically sick watching some of the contact because the Tongans were pumped. They were up for it. The Tongans always are, though. Yeah, the France won in 2007 and they won that game as well. They were not intimidated. And I think that got into the head of the All Blacks thinking this isn't working. You know, they there's variations of the haka as well, and that got in the French team's head. Um, you know, and but look, Ireland and France have both beaten the All Blacks in the autumn, so there is a way of dealing with it. It can motivate you, or you can go in your shell. And if you stand up to it and go, okay, because that takes a lot of emotional, and then the emotional energy. You can, if some players get over emotional, get too wound up, they're going to get silly penalties, sin bins, discipline. They overexert themselves, mental fatigue, emotionally fatigued, and you can take advantage of that. As I say with the new F1 regs, I mean, I'm not going to watch it this season. But when it comes to some of the European circuits, like Spa, I think it's going to be the real test of the regs because the altitude changes and the undulations. That's going to be the teller. We'll see how, because most of these modern circuits are very dull and flat. There's no terrain changes. But let's say hypothetically there was going to be a US Grand Prix at Laguna Seca. There's altitude changes there. Road America, Watkins Glen. There's a lot of straightaways that are undulating that aren't purely flat. There's ups and downs and some high speed sections. It'll be interesting to see like an F1 car testing on the the Sippy Tau. That's yeah, the Sippy Tau's the Tongan one. Yes. That was the 2017. That was there was hate in that. There was a lot of hate in that. The Cook Islands one's quite good as well. The Cook Islands, um, they have a very intimidating one. They're no, really intimidating, um, and that really puts the spite. You just have to find them. They it's a cultural expression, and it's absolutely brilliant. I love it. Some of my friends read it go, "Why are they doing this?" Until you have met someone. I mean, I used to play with a Tongan when I was playing rugby. He was the most gentle giant off the field. He was so friendly and welcoming and pleasant to be around on the field. Absolute man, mountain animal, destroyer of men. He was an ex-international as well, so he played test level, which was terrifying. Um, he only played like 4 games for us, but he was doing I think he was an engineer by trade, so he was doing an engineering contract. Wanted to keep fit, wanted to play a few games. Tell you now, give him the ball. He's the outside centre. Give him the ball. Run people over. I think, yeah, the 2007 Samoa Tonga Rugby Union World Cup. That one, you got 60 players who want to kill each other. Something like that. That's all their squads as well. On the bench, all the squad players on the bench. It was a brutal game. There were players getting I think there was 3 red cards and 4 yellows or something. At one point, there was not a lot of players on the field at one point. It was like watching sevens, and they were still going for some absolutely brutal contact. But yeah, it for me, it's a great tradition that both rugby league and rugby union keep. Um, I honestly believe that it's a great tradition that the two codes of rugby keep, and I think it shouldn't be denied to them. Um, it's amazing. I It's also a sign of respect if, like, you've got a birthday, a wedding, a funeral, a christening. If you're in like in the Maori Polynesian cultures, doesn't matter if you're of the culture or a European or Asian, and you're very respecting the community. If you get a haka for you, that is a real sign of respect within the community as well. So and I've got friends from like New Zealand, and I went to school with some New Zealanders, and I've met a lot of Kiwis. Tell you now, they are really nice people. I've got family out there, so in school they teach you what the haka means. They it's a cultural thing. Um, Bad weekend for McLaren and Red Bull. Red Bull both DNF. Well, no points for four cars. Again, it's new regs. There's going to be teething problems with new regulation. Reading all the test reports from Bahrain, there was a lot of concerns about the cars wobbling. There's a term for it where they're just bottoming it out, and it's still the aero and the suspension setup. Mercedes struggling as well, which is actually kind of refreshing. Now you've got to see Lewis Hamilton properly drive a car that's uncompetitive rather than always having the best machinery. Now his real driver skills are going to be tested. I don't know where F1 goes. I think Liberty Media maybe not taking it fully in the right direction, but they are living with the aftermath of Bernie Ecclestone era. He's signed the current TV deal, and taking it off free to air, I think, was a massive, massive mistake, and it has turned a lot of people off the sport. The lack of accessibility, um, and there are problems, and I think an overhaul of the regulations was long overdue. There's no denying that. Um, and while last season was highly entertaining and controversial, and I don't like. I mean, my next door neighbour Adam, he's a good friend of mine. He was really pissed off with how the season ended, and for me, as just a sports fan, to have the Netflix documentary series Race to Win or whatever it is, a Race to Live. Some drivers have come out and said this is not a drama series. This is not a sitcom. This is our livelihoods, and to possibly manipulate to create more drama rather than actually get the right result because the right driver is the best driver. If you look at the stats, Max Verstappen actually had better stats than Hamilton for laps led, wins, poles. He was actually the better driver head to head between the two on all the stats, which is fine. But at the same time, the way that title was decided and the suspicious nature of it. Now, whether there was actual intent to fix it, so it literally, the FIA's come out looking like crap. The teams haven't covered themselves in any glory. And the other teams, so the non Red Bull Mercedes, Ferrari have been a bit of a block to the new regulations and spending cap regs. But the problem is 70% of the grid has been screwed over for years by the regulations and the imbalance in spending within F1, where 3 or 4 teams have all the money they can spend, and the rest are really hard up against it to compete. The limited nature of less engine manufacturers pulling out of the sport in recent years and giving up on the sport. Honda being the latest again. Um, Ford not in there, or Ford Cosworth as it was at one point. Toyota have been and gone. BMW, Alfa Romeo is part of the same Fiat group. So Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, even though it's badge of the car, it's still basically a Fiat-owned company. But you've got Renault, Mercedes, a Honda derivative, so a privateer engine manufacturer technically that's using the Honda plans for a couple of years until another engine can be developed for them, and Ferrari, which is Fiat, just a posh Fiat. Lamborghini have been in F1 before, but engine manufacturers come and go. But the issue is most of the teams are actually client teams for the engine manufacturers, for the factory teams. And there's only two true factory teams on the grid, and that's Mercedes and Ferrari. Everyone else is basically a customer client of two factory teams, and then a Honda engine that's been made under license. So that's your problem. Is there's a lack of lack of choice of engine. It's not the same as what it was many years ago when you had, let's say, 7, 8, maybe 9 engine manufacturers. Now have 2 and a bit because one of them is under license. That's a problem for me. That is a problem for me. Either they all go out with half Ferrari, half Mercedes as the engine manufacturers, because Renault in there as well. So you got Renault, you got 3 engine manufacturers of differing levels of quality, and the rest of everyone else is a client. That is a problem. But I think, but yes, the regulation change was overdue. The salary cap kind of spending cap was overdue as well. But a revenue share, I think, is overdue. But I think we'll see what happens. But we haven't seen regs with this kind of aero package for nearly 40 years. There's only been 1 or 2. There's only, I think, one. Is it Patrick Head or Adrian Newey? He's only one of the engineers who was in F1 at the time. There's only one engineer on aero, engineer on the grid who was actually active in F1 the last time we had this bouncing phenomenon with the cars. So it's all a learning process for a lot of these engineering departments of these race teams with their factories in Europe. It's a massive, massive engineering headache because they've been told the parameters they can work within, and it's having some unintended consequences that we haven't seen. So the cars are actually harder to drive, but the drivers want to have tyres. That means you can push for longer. The drivers are pushing for more equal racing themselves. They've come out and said, this is what we want, we're not getting it. And when you've got your biggest assets being the guys in the cockpit who are going at high speed saying, we can't do that for an hour and a half because the regulations don't let us, that says your product is got problems. I still think we're a long way off seeing the proper wheel-to-wheel IndyCar style or touring car style, not bash them off the road, but all things being equal under the regulations because the tyres don't allow it. The aero, there'll be modifications made to the cars, in-season add-ons, developments. When they get to about Spa, I think Spa is going to be the track where we see the true aero package, what it actually is. I think that's going to be the true test of the current regs and the current aerodynamics is going to be Spa. Because not only have you got altitude changes and undulating track, which is fast, full throttle, weather, climate at Spa, you can have 4 seasons. You can actually sleet in summer because it's in the Ardennes Mountains. You can have strange weather phenomenon where it's raining at one end and dry at the other, and then sort of sunny at one corner and it's a biblical rainstorm. You can have all 4 seasons in a day. You can start with fog, Spa, which delays the start some years. You can start with torrential rain or 35-degree heat that suddenly turns into a thunderstorm. The conditions at Spa will be a true test of the aero package that the current regs have. And if the cars have problems at Spa, then the aero package is the wrong regulation change. If the teams can't get it right by Spa and iron out their issues, It's the wrong regulation change. For me, Spa and Imola are, I think, the two tracks that I think test the cars the most. I think Suzuka as well is another track again, um, where they're going to be tested. The older tracks, basically, the more traditional tracks. Yes, Portugal, Estoril, definitely. But they tested at Bahrain this year rather than at Barcelona. So make of that what you will as well. Estoril was always a brilliant, brilliant circuit. Some of the Italian circuits as well, some of the Japanese circuits. There's a lot of circuits out there that the older circuits built before the late 90s. For me, they're the true F1 circuits. Because not only are they high speed sections, they also have the tight, twisty sections, long straightaways, another hairpin here, chicane there, undulating up and down. Some of the modern circuits in Dubai and Bahrain are just flat, soulless, no undulation, no altitude change. Portimao, I prefer Estoril. I grew up watching Estoril in the 90s as an F1 track. Portimao, it's more modern. It's got less. I think it's less of a test because it's too nice. No, it's the perfect track. You want to have a track which is a bit. They won't ever race at Thruxton or Donington would be a good one. But yeah, the Grand Prix or the Grand Prix circuit at Brands Hatch because that's got undulation and long straights and changes. There are loads of tracks that you could test an individual car by itself, not all on the road, and you could get a good feel for what the car's doing. But they screwed up Donington, stayed at Silverstone. But that's my opinion. Zandvoort in Holland and Assen Holland would be a brilliant one because there's some. That's a good one. Hockenheimring, Nürburgring, not the Nordschleife because that would kill people, but Nürburgring. There's some altitude changes in that, ups and downs. It's not pure flat. There you've got rises and drops, and high speed sections. Well, it's not the most entertaining circuit for overtaking. The Hungaroring, ironically, is one of the most testing circuits for drivers' endurance. It's a very simple circuit, but it does take a lot out of the driver, and that's got a lot of straightaways and then reasonably high and mid-speed corners. So there are tracks out there that, for me at least, but I'm a bit more of a 90s, 80,000s F1 fan before some of these really Survivor. Donington was meant to be hosting F1 races after like 2009, 2010. The company that was tasked with redeveloping it screwed up. There's all sorts of issues. There's a bit of dodginess, backhanders, there's a bit of corruption. Went bankrupt and left it in a mess. So if you follow the Download Festival, music festival, it used to be on the infield and the old Dunlop Bridge. The people who now own it now, in order to try and make some money, sold the old Dunlop Bridge off in sections for auction. You could pay like 10, 20, 30,000, as little as a pound. But they were selling chunks. So people have got sections of the Dunlop Bridge in their gardens. They sold off sections of it at auction. They cut it up, and you could buy as little as a bit that big to something as big as my flat. Sections of the bridge to make money. They really screwed up the redevelopment of Donington. And for a couple of years, MotoGP didn't go there, which I felt was an absolute crying ass shame. I think it was 2009. They said, "Oh, this is not going to be ready. We've screwed this up." And there were people who were working on the redevelopment, weren't getting paid. Touring car fans and superbike fans and MotoGP fans in the UK have said they screwed up Donington badly. Those who got a download say it's not the same experience as what it was with pre 2008, pre 2009. The whole complex has been screwed up. Brands Hatch, I think the first corner is why they don't have F1 there. Basically, the first and last corners is why you don't have F1 at Brands Hatch, because the superbikes and the touring cars prove you can have fatal and near fatal accidents in other forms of motor racing in the last few years. That is why we do not have F1, because the start finish straight is actually on a curve and it's coming uphill and then drops downhill. So it's all blind. It's a blind crest. You can't have it. Not unless you put a new pit straight on the main back straight, and you would have to redevelop parkland in it. Alton Park would be a good one to do a track day test for single cars only. I wouldn't try and overtake at Alton Park. Kill yourself. If they could get Snetterton can't be an F1 circuit because of noise regulations of where it is in Norfolk. Although that would be a brilliant circuit to see the cars go flat out, especially through the bomb hole. That would test the aero and the suspension of an F1 car. It wrecks many a touring car and wrecks many a superbike. Snetterton is my favourite circuit, and they have changed the layout of Snetterton, so it's lost a little bit of what it had in the 90s and the 2000s. But the bomb hole corner is a car and bike breaker, because it's an old World War II bomb crater, because it used to be an airfield that the Luftwaffe decided to drop a load of bombs on, and the bomb hole was called the bomb hole because a bomb blew up in that part of the airfield and they never filled it in. So they just made a racetrack over it, and you go in, you're leaning in, you're steering in, and it dips like that. You go through like a 250-pound bomb hole, caused by a Luftwaffe 250-pound bomb, circa 1940. And that is possibly one of the greatest corners in motor racing, the bomb hole. But look, I'm unashamedly a British superbike and British touring car fan. I have no, I'm quite openly unashamedly about that. There are some British touring car circuits that I would love to see an F1 car get tested on. However, only one of our circuits now meets FIA F1 standard, and that is the current Silverstone layout, which is appalling. And I'm not a fan of Silverstone at all. I think the redevelopment and the layout, the facilities, the parking, it always floods there when it rains. For me, Donington would have been a better choice for the British Grand Prix. I know Silverstone is meant to be home, it's the headquarters of the British Racing Drivers Club and all that. But for me, if they got the Donington development right, which they didn't, I looked at the plans of the redevelopment, it looked good, and they bit off more than they could chew, and there was some dodginess and some misappropriated funds, and the company that was doing it went bankrupt into liquidation, and the people working on it weren't getting paid properly and were raising concerns about a lot of things, and it all went horribly wrong. But I would love to see an old F1 car go around Thruxton, because that would probably kill a few drivers. Thruxton's my local circuit. It's my favourite circuit. F1 came out of Grand Prix racing in the 1910s, pre World War One. Grand Prix is, great first race, great race. It's French. Grand Prix racing started in France. Post World War Two, that's when the modern F1 era begins. And then you had, Formula Two, which is now GP2. It'll always be Formula 2. And then you had Formula 3000, which is now Formula 3 and Formula 4. For me, F1 was born out of people just wanted to have normality again, and us Europeans and the South Americans really was the reason why. Alfa Romeo, their F1 car that won in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, was actually designed pre World War II, and then the war broke out, and the Alfa Romeo engineers weren't necessarily fans of Mr. Mussolini and Mr. Hitler, and they hid their cars in a bunker for the duration of the war. And as soon as the war ended, they got them out, started the engine up, found a guy brave enough to test drive the car, and then Fangio drove it and won, and Ascari drove it, won. The car, when it competed, was better than anything that was being designed at the time in the 40s and the 50s. The design was like 15 years old, and it walloped the opposition for 2 years, and then they retired it. Alfa Romeo's car was an older design, but it was better than what Jaguar or Mercedes or Ferrari were putting out, because Ferrari and Alfa Romeo were separate companies back then, and Maserati and Lola and all these other. It was better than the Lotus or the Ferrari or whatever Maserati, and it was 15 years older, and it won. And then they went, okay, we've won our two world championships. We're going to retire the car now. It has the best win ratio for the chassis and the engine of any. Why was it better? Look, the engineers at Alfa Romeo, God rest their souls, they obviously um, were developing the car before the war, and obviously war broke out, and they had developed the car and they hid it. There was like four of them made, and they hid them away in a secret location, and then they got them out of the secret location, and they did a test drive around Monza in Milan, which is where Alfa Romeo is from, and then they took it and entered the new what is now F1 Grand Prix racing. They entered, they blew the field away. I don't know why it was better. The same layout, front engine, long front end, short back end, open exhausts, no baffles, uh, no no safety, like goggles, leather hat, driving gloves. Overalls were not fire retardant. The mechanics would fill the car up out of a jerry can with a nozzle, like a cone, and be smoking while they're filling up the cars in the pit lane. Safe, health and safety wasn't a thing. This is when men were actually men, and not toasters. I've got my Grand Prix Heroes book by Murray Walker. I've got it out in previous live streams. Just Alfa Romeo. It's in the Murray Walker Grand Prix Heroes book that I've got. I've brought it out in previous live streams before. It's a very famous story. If you're really into motoring history, not just sport, but just engineering history, and I don't know why that car was so much superior to every. So the Auto Union, only I think five guys could drive it. It killed three of them. That was the dominant car, and so they looked at the Auto Union of the 30s of the Grand Prix era before F1. And the Alpha engineers were like, there's a reason why this car is impossible to drive and why only five men can drive it and it's killed three of them. We need to be as good as that, but less lethal for our drivers, because we need all our drivers to come home safely. And back then, drivers died every race weekend. Someone would get badly injured or die. It got to a point where every season there'll be at least 10 fatalities. Like watch Rush, that really blows you away. Niki Lauda survived an accident, but other people died on that same race. The era got so dangerous for F1, F2, or GP1, whatever, Formula 2 race. Well, Jimmy Clark didn't die in an F1 race; he died in an F2 race. I think it was was it Hockenheim or Nurburgring? Crashed into a tree. It was on the old Hockenheim ring, which had a long 7 mile back straight. And champions were dying, like world champions, race winners. Like we're talking, these guys are not bad drivers, and the safety was shambolic. But Alfa Romeo had a brilliant idea. They looked at what happened with Auto Union and how it killed its drivers. This car was supremely fast, like lethally fast. But the way the aerodynamics worked and the suspension and the whole setup made it very difficult to control in high speed corner sections. And under braking, it got very squirrely. So, how Alfa Romeo was so superior in the first 2 years of what is now F1, I couldn't tell you the secrets. You would have to go into the motor museums, actually look at the car and look at the cars it was racing against at the time, because they're very similar. Look, every car is very at that time. All the cars were very, very similar in look, with the Maseratis and Ferraris and Alfa Romeo, and I think Lotus had come along by this point. There was Jaguars as well, Mercedes. A lot of what Aston Martin, I think, raced in F. So a lot of the marquee brands you see now, Porsche, existed then, obviously, which is why they exist now. But all the cars look very, very similar in their design. why the Alfa Romeo was so superior in its very short lifespan as a race car, not in the actual lifespan of the car, which is about 15, 20 years, from design table to racing it, with with the war in between and rationing and the shortage of steel that Europe faced, is multiple reasons. But the only true way to really understand, it's partly the skill of the drivers they had. Alfa Romeo had some very good drivers. I think it was Fangio and Ascari, I think, drove the bloody thing, and they really were champions. I think Fangio drove the nuts off it, but you have to understand that for whatever reason, it beat its competitors. Now, whether it was better handling through the corners, better acceleration, I do not know. All I know is the car was 15 years old when they raced it, and it bloody won. And hadn't been touched or developed during the war, so there was no development on it. Um, you wouldn't. They are they're museum pieces. They are in private collections. No one would sell them. I think some of these old Grand Prix cars are now property of the various countries. They're like gifts to the state. They cannot. They come out occasionally at Glorious Goodwood and some of these historical race events where they're not driven at full pace. Right? They're driven at like 30% pace because some of them are really old and fragile. And it's, you crash them. That's a 15 million quid car you've written off, or a 15 million euro or $50 million car. It's like these things are rare. There are very few of them. There's very few spare parts. And when you're driving a car that's 80 years old, 85 years old, nearly 90 years old actually in design, you've got to be careful. The fact that Alfa Romeo at that time and the Auto Union, which is now Audi, by the way, um, in the 20s and 30s design cars like that shows the skill of the engineers involved. And bearing in mind, no computers, no 3G graphics, no CAD computer aided design. This is blokes with pencil and ruler doing it all by hand. The design, going into the metal mill, so milling the parts again by hand. No, not as with, of course, factory automation have become in this because Henry Ford. But a small team of engineers and factory workers assembling these cars by hand painstakingly. So each engine's different. So I think there was I think 3 or 4 Alfa cars entered. 4 engines are all different because there's minute differences because they're assembled by hands. They don't have the same CC in the engine, or one valve might be a little bit tighter. That carb might be on a different balance here. So the cars themselves, the gearboxes, they're unique, absolutely unique. As time goes on, you get more universal parts for cars, and you know. But at that time, those cars were assembled in a shed by a couple of Italians, a couple of Germans, or a couple of Brits in a shed, right? Late at night in the winter for the season in the spring. These are blokes who do not have a lot of money, and they are making parts by hand, milling parts by hand, and putting them together. They are improvising. Um, yeah, that is true. There was. I think Alfa Romeo had war contracts in both World War One and World War Two to make parts for the Italian military. They made tank engines, armored cars. They supplied engines for aircraft, so they knew what they were doing. Alfa Romeo was not a small company; it was a very big company. So they had made war material in World War One, World War Two. Fiat's an old company, and Alfa Romeo's an old company. These companies go back before World War One. Some of the earliest, combustion engine engineering companies in Italy as part of their industrial revolution in the north. Same with Lancia, same with Maserati, Ferrari. Lamborghini started off as a tractor manufacturer. There you go. And the reason why they made supercars is because Mr. Lamborghini was ripped off by Mr. Ferrari and wasn't. He had an issue with his drive shaft in his Ferrari, and he went to Enzo and he goes, "Look, I'm not happy with the car. I'm having issues." And Enzo Ferrari goes, "You're a tractor man. You're a farmer. I'm not interested." So he went, "Okay, I'll make my own," and he did, and they were amazing. And they sell more every year. They had more. Lamborghinis are sold every year than Ferraris now. Wasn't always the case. And the Lamborghini Miura is possibly the best car ever made. It's the most beautiful car ever made, in my opinion. The Miura, the 1960s, 70s Miura. Oh, what a beautiful car. If I could own one, I bloody would, but I would need £2.5 million to get one up to UK emission standards and modern engine modifications just to make sure it ran on the modern petrol and didn't blow up. A Lamborghini Miura is most beautiful. That is the most stunning car ever made. That's a little tidbit. Lamborghini made tractors for a living, and then he had a disagreement with Ferrari over an issue with a drive shaft. So he made his own. He made his own cars. He went, I've got an engineering company. I'm making tractors. We have an engine plant. We have an assembly plant. Sod it. Let's convert one of our factory lines to making cars. So he made two models before the Miura, and there was some issues with them. And then the Miura came out, and that completely changed car engineering forever. That's one of the most pivotal cars ever made. But yes, they did apply lessons they'd learned, not in especially with the pilots in World War One and World War Two, and aerodynamics and importance of stable and unstable aerodynamics. But it was mostly to do with the engines. A Rolls Royce Merlin engine, you can put that in a car, just a smaller form of it. The same principle, and that's basically what F1 engines were in the 50s, were aircraft engines. In principle, they had the same principle design, except without a rotor blade on the front. You reverse it, so you've got the gearing and the drive shaft at the back, and they made it on a smaller scale. You just take some of the cylinders out. That's basically what an F1 car was in the 50s, was a World War II fighter aircraft without wings, with the engine the other way around. So they are amazing cars. Like, they are the most stunning cars. And then the Miura comes along in the 60s and 70s, and for me, I want one. Possibly the most advanced car for its era as well, for aerodynamics. If you were to put that aero style in a modern car, it would just go. And with modern supercar engines, if you had the right chassis and the right engineering now, you could remake the Miura, and that thing would be an animal. And it would, the noise. I mean, I've seen the Lamborghini Miura in full flight, and it's just a stunning car. The aerodynamics and the chassis on it are second to none. The mechanical side of it leaves a little bit to be desired, but it's the best Lamborghini ever made. It is the best Lamborghini ever made. And some of the design features ended up on a Ferrari GT40. You will notice some of the aerodynamics forward were like, not bad. We'll nick some of them because we have some money. Lamborghini doesn't. Lamborghini's bankrupt, but we have some money. So let's make our own car. But not all Lambos. Some Lambos are absolutely hideous looking, I will admit. The Murcielago is beautiful. The Miura is beautiful. And the Jalpa, while it was a flawed car, I still think is better looking than a Testarossa. Not gonna lie. Yeah. Maseratis, I think, are better looking than Ferraris, the sister car. They have the same chassis, just different engines and different gearboxes. But the Maserati is a reliable Ferrari. And I'm not joking, the Maseratis are the reliable version of Ferrari. No, for me, the Miura, the Murcielago, the two best looking cars ever made. I'm not even debating it. They are the two best looking cars ever made. And talk about aerodynamics. A lot of lessons were learned, yes, correct, from World War II and the Korean War, and implementing what we now know as aerodynamics in motorsport today. A lot of those lessons were learned, but bearing in mind, in the 50s, and a lot of these F1 teams were still building their cars in workshops and sheds. Small group of about maybe 20 to 30 guys, a design team, maybe a factory team of like 100 at max. But the initial design was made in a shed by a couple of blokes in slapcaps with pipes hanging out, coming up with really harebrained ideas, and a lot of them didn't get off the design table. But when you think about it, that's how Lotus started, in a shed. Lots of trouble, usually serious. It's the same with Noble, the car manufacturer now, and Caterham. Caterham's actually now got a factory, but Caterham and Westfield, the other kit car. Again, bunch of blokes in a shed going, let's make a sports car. How it happened. I mean, Lotus back in the day were a couple of blokes in a shed in East England. Basically, came up with the first Lotus. Lotus were a very, again, as an F1 team, the history of behind Lotus in the 50s. Graham Chapman. Look him up. Guy who designed Lotus. Just an outstanding engineer. While Lotuses are historically known to be historically unreliable, the Grand Prix cars he came up with were stunning. You've got some of they should do a film about Grand Prix racing in the 50s and 60s, because I think that's when men were men. That's before the aero packages comes along in the late 60s, early 70s, following on from Le Mans and all that. And then the turbo era comes, and then the cars are absolutely bloody hideous. For me, the golden age of Formula One is the 50s and the early 60s, when they just front engine cars with a long front end, long wheelbase, short back end, open exhausts. You had a gear lever, sometimes in between your legs. So you sit, you've got a gear lever in between your legs or just to the side. Oil pressure, choke, couple of rev limiter, speedo. That's all you got. None of these buttons where you can run like half your household appliances. Literally, so basic cockpits. Gear stick down either on your right or your left, depending, you're right or left-handed. That was, again, drivers had input. A wooden and metal steering wheel, oil pressure, fuel level, choke, speedo, rev limiter. Sometimes speedo and revs were on the same dial. Very basic cockpits, really basic. Exhausts, no baffles, straight exhausts coming out, sometimes right by the driver's head. Long front end, pair of racing goggles, a leather or some kind of helmet, racing gloves, and overalls which would melt to your skin. And you can, if you look at the old photos like Jim Clark and Jackie Stewart, Ascari, Graham Hill in his earlier days, Fangio, you've got the goggle marks, and you've got the black oil and crap all over their face. Goggles, and you've got the goggle marks. They should really do a film about that era of Grand Prix racing. Absolutely. It was literally like being in a World War II dogfight, because there was no safety. It was try not to crash. The cars would blow up, like catch fire. A lot of them did have gearbox issues. A lot of them had transmission issues, or lost a gear. So you try to get fifth, and you can only get fourth. You try to get third, and it skips to fourth. Or you're trying to downshift, and second's gone. So you're nursing a car that's not well. And they want the back end. There's no weight over the back end at all. Rear wheel drive with no weight, and the back end trying to overtake the front. You see them go around corners, and they are drifting. And flat out, just it's just the noise of them and the look of them, and it's just. I've been to car museums. There's Brookwood, which is not too far from where I live, in Surrey, which is southwest of London. I'm west of London, so I'm in Berkshire. So learn your British geography. Old Grand Prix circuit from the pre-World War II, and it's the old Vickers armaments aircraft factory as well. Yep. And Hawker Siddeley and all sorts. So there was World War I, World War II aircraft made there. And it's got the old banking, very similar to the old Monza. The old banking, you can walk on a section of it. yeah, people crashed and died there too. Many Americans say they don't like racing because you just watch the cars turn left and it takes too long. What's the count? Um, they need to look at footage of they need to watch European touring cars or any of the local British touring cars or some of the national touring car championships. They need to watch rallying. So when you take the road car and you take it off road, um, they need to watch superbikes. Um, I think they need to watch, yeah, touring cars, superbikes, um, and not on the modern courses. They need to watch them on tracks like Thruxton, which are dangerous. Thruxton is one of the most is regularly voted alongside Imola by drivers as and the Nordschleife at the Nurburgring and the full Nurburgring, that's about 15 miles. The Nordschleife, Thruxton, Le Mans, the La Sarthe circuit, to the full circuit, that's killed people. The famous crash in the 50s where the car flips into the grandstand and kills like 56 people. Just don't. And Mark Webber going upside down in the Mercedes, which he also repeated at Valencia in 2010 when he took out Heikki Kovalainen and Red Bull gives you wings. Mark Webber's done it twice in his racing career. He's flipped a car because the aero fell. They really need to watch circuit racing in Europe on a European circuit or a Japanese circuit. V8 supercars in Australia as well. Bathurst, that kills people, has killed people. Um, they need to watch the V8 supercars in Australia or the touring cars, British touring cars, or superbikes in Europe because that's when you see proper some of the accidents. I mean, they're going at slightly slower speeds to a certain extent. Not necessarily the V8 supercars because they can hit 200 mile an hour, but the British touring cars, much like the V8 supercars in Australia, that will give them a different perspective on saloon car and hatchback car racing. That that's my best advice would be to check out the V8 supercars. The supercars has its own YouTube channel and it's showing the old race replays, the old classic races, and race replays, current races. And you just need to watch it, and then you'll understand what motor racing means to me as a European. And I don't know, I love NASCAR. I really do. I like their road courses that they've chosen. Um, I really like, you know, but you have to appreciate the difference in racing culture because you've got more of the oval, Daytona, Talladega. We have the more, well, this used to be country lanes, which was what Spa was. Let's turn it to a racetrack because all those Spa used to be all country lanes. And then they took them off the road network and made them into a racetrack. Um, and all the corners are actually the villages around that part of the Ardennes, like Stavelot, Le Source. These are all locations in the Ardennes region of Belgium. And it's, for me, Spa is my favourite circuit. Unfortunately, with the current FIA regulations, they've ruined it, but because there's now runoff areas used to be gravel traps, and so going through Eau Rouge flat out now, you can run offline and not die, or you will die, but in a different way. But that is actually based on old public roads, Spa. That is old public roads that ended up becoming a racetrack. That's how they used to do Grand Prix racing before the war was on public roads. They would tape off a section and you would go around, and then how might we make a permanent racetrack? The racetracks in Britain are basically airfields that were abandoned by the RAF or no longer used by the RAF. So Snetterton, Silverstone, there's a few others as well. Rockingham used to be an airfield, but it's closed now. That's now a road test facility, which is a science park. Terrible circuit. Alton Park is in the grounds of a stately home. So that was someone's private racetrack, and I'm not joking on that. Thruxton is just dangerous. my favourite tracks in England are Snetterton and Thruxton, and one's an ex-RAF airfield. The other one is just dangerous. Silverstone. The reason why Silverstone was some local amateur racing enthusiasts, car enthusiasts, used to challenge each other to races around the airfield, and they laid out what is now the track layout. We need to make a circuit, and they laid out their circuit, and that became Silverstone. They used to just drive around the abandoned airfield. That became Silverstone. Snetterton, again, local enthusiasts. Well, let's just drive our cars around here very fast. That became Snetterton. Spa, again, it was based on the old route they took. Yeah, that's how Spa came about. Was this used to be country lanes? That's how they used to Grand Prix race before the war. Was they would follow the road network. Go, how can we make a loop? Any kind of circular or clockwise or anti-clockwise loop. And they would start with a long straight, that'd be your pit straight, and they would figure out on the local road maps how to make a circuit. Then they would organise the event. You might have 10 cars, you might have 50 cars. They'd race around the loop for however many laps of that loop in the daylight hours, and some of the races would last up to 10 hours in the height of summer. And eventually the locals went, well, how about instead of we lose our roads for like a week because they've got to close them down, put the barriers up, take the sign. How about there's no villages inside Spa that was the racetrack. There's nothing there. Let's build a racetrack. Let's put grandstands in. Let's actually turn it and make it a permanent thing so we don't have to take diversions. If we want to go straight down, we've got to go 10 miles right. And the locals were like, let's build a racetrack. I don't know if it was Road America or Watkins Glen. I think it was It's Road America that started off in the same way as well in the 50s. That used to be country roads, and they went, no, we're having too many accidents, and locals get pissed off that some guys crashed through their house. Let's make a racetrack, and it's one of the best racetracks in North America. Is Road America, which used to be again public roads. Alton Park is not the best racetrack because it's very narrow, but it is actually in the grounds of a stately home. So wealthy individual. Alton Park is an old, I think Georgian or Jacobean, which is the Stuart period of English history, British history, stately home, and the guy who owned it allowed people to race round his stately estate because there's all the lanes and private driveways, and he went, let's just build a racetrack. Because he had some mates and he used to drive around it. Let's make a racetrack, and then it's in the grounds, but the public can come. And that's how Alton Park. And there's a bit where you can go up near the stately home and come down. The stories about how some of these racetracks came to be is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Some of them are so. There's a TT road racing track here near Scarborough that's actually still public roads today. It's another road markings. I forget what it's called, but it's up near Scarborough in Yorkshire. That's amazing. The Monza is inside a royal park, an old former Italian hunting lodge. That's where Monza, and it's in a state-owned. It's not quite a national park, but it's a state park, and it used to be a royal land. I think owned by the Duke of Milan, I think, or something like that. And before World War II, that's where Alfa Romeo tested their cars. And because it's in the Royal Park of Monza, that's how Monza came to be. It was on government land, basically, protected government land. So there's no houses or anything. So you've got to like, oh, we've got residents living here. We can't. So planning permission was like, you can build a racetrack within this area of the Royal Park, the former, which is now a state park. So that's how Monza came about. And it's a beautiful, and the people of Milan and the local city of Monza, so you've got Milan and Monza and Bergamo. For them, that is a community icon, which they fiercely defend its existence. Then there's some other ones. Assen in Holland is just ridiculous. That's legendary for superbikes. of the history of superbikes, be it world, European, or British superbikes. That is a legendary racetrack. Zandvoort, that's killed people. Um, that's more dangerous in F1 history, and is important for Grand Prix racing. Um, there are just some amazing racetracks, and Magny-Cours, Estoril. Paul Ricard is not so good, but that's named after a former French racing driver. But Magny-Cours is for me the traditional French Grand Prix. Le Mans, again, Le Mans based on old public roads as well. I'm not joking on that. Even Daytona is used to be straight on Daytona Beach. Used to be dirt track, dirt oval, and local lads would have races, and then it became Daytona. The origins of NASCAR, you had bootleggers, and then they decided to race each other. Boy races in North Swindon tell the local racing to race. The boy races of Finch Hampstead do the same here. The boy races of Berkshire do the same thing every night. Every night. Because there's a lot of straight roads down here, so you can have drag races and races between junctions, and it's bikers as well. Straight road, straight road. Belt it. Pop a good few wheelies as well. They're nice, straight roads, slight ups and downs, but they're dead straight around here. It's ridiculous. You've got a road that is actually, I think, 13.5 miles. It's called 9 Mile Ride, but it's actually 13 point something miles. And I live at the western end, and the eastern end is basically where my mum lives. And I have been flat out down 9 Mile Ride. And bear in mind, my mum's best mate died on this road, and I have mixed emotions about it because you could do a time trial rally stage on it. Quite literally could. If planning permission was put in by a race organizer, you really could do a time trial on it. But I've lost. My mum has lost her best friend on this road, and when she comes to visit me, she has to go past the exact point where her friend died, just before I was born, and that is very difficult for my mum. But that's how, and this is what you have to remember when they were setting up these racetracks and doing the original Grand Prix racing, drivers would die. And Road America has a similar origin story to Spa, and a similar origin story to a few other racetracks where they started off as public roads and then they became racetracks. Spa and Road America have very similar origin stories where local car enthusiasts and race enthusiasts would have informal races. And when they became formalised, they would still close off the public roads, much like the Isle of Man TT. But locals loved the event because it brought a lot of money and interest to a rather rural area. And especially Spa, because what happened in World War II at the Battle of the Bulge and the infrastructure damage, it brought much needed revenue to an area that had been devastated by conflict. And at Road America in Wisconsin, a rural backwater, not a lot of opportunities for high paying jobs, brought a lot of money to the area. And so the locals were in favour of making the racetracks, but there were also reasons why. There were so many serious accidents. Because you're using public tarmac is different to racetrack tarmac. It's another thing I noticed. And you don't have the safety barriers. There's a tree there, bang. There's a telegraph pole there, bang. And when you have that, it's harder to put safety features in place. And you've got to remember, in the 40s and 50s, it was basically Darwinism. The fittest survive. If you survived it, you were considered as a superstar. How many races have the drive? They don't do that at Le Mans anymore. The old Le Mans start that stopped safety concerns. That was a thing until not very long ago. They don't do that anymore. The Le Mans start. FIA regulations say the driver has to be in the car. So now it's a rolling start. The driver has to be in the car before the race actually starts, rather than run to the car and get started, because you've got cars leaving at different times and there's collisions and you've got too many people. The historical thing was Daytona, the Daytona 24-hour, Le Mans, the old Sebring 12-hour. I think there's the Monza 24-hour. Um, the old endurance races used to be like that, and to us, unfortunately, and same with Grand Prix racing as well, or traditionally, but that hasn't been a thing for I think 20, 30 years. It was a thing in my lifetime. It stopped in my lifetime, but that's an FIA ruling. You can't do it now, which is a shame because that was fun. um, but that's some of the traditions we've lost in the last 20 or so years. But that's to do with FIA regs, and it is a safety thing. Um, Historically, yes, they used to run to the cars and then get in. But with modern safety features in the cars now, with all the safety belts, you actually need someone to help you do your belts up. Back in the day, it was you get in. Now you have the modern safety features with the hands device and the seat changes and the cockpit safety features, and you've got the netting up the belts. If you notice in endurance GT racing on the IMSA series, and if you watch the 24-hour endurance series, when they do the driver change, the driver getting out has to help the driver getting in do his belts up. You cannot do it yourself. The the driver in the pit crew, the driver getting out. So when you do a driver swap in an endurance race like Le Mans, the driver getting out and the driver getting in. The driver getting out might be 5'8". The driver getting in might be 6 foot. They've got to do the seat adjustment. You cannot do the running start, the old Le Mans start anymore. Um, it's to do with FIA regs, um, which is a shame. Don't get me wrong, but there were so many accidents in the opening laps because drivers weren't fully belted in, injuries, deaths because drivers weren't properly secured in their cockpits. They weren't, you know, they were rushing, so they were forgetting to do things. Mechanical failures because the oil pressure wasn't right, so the cylinders have gone through, and you're stuck on the start finish straight on fire as cars are going past at 100 to 200 mile an hour, and your car's on fire. They just put a yellow flag out and you go around them. No, the 50s and 60s era, while it's great to look at and imagine the smell and the noise, you couldn't do it now because health and safety is a thing. Um, you can't have any boo boos anymore because people get sued. And I think a big part of it was the Le Mans crash in the 50s where the car ends up in the grandstand. I'm not joking. There was an aero failure on one of the cars, and just talk, type in the Le Mans disaster, Le Mans racing disaster. Very similar to Mark Webber's one in the late 90s where his car loses the aero and flips and actually flipped over the safety barrier 30, 40 years before. This is where the fans used to be right by the pit lane, like literally overlooking the start finish straight. Like, we're talking from this wall here to basically where my front door is over there, just in the corner. That's how close they could get to the actual racetrack at the time, maybe a little bit further. And this car, there's an accident, loses, it gets airborne, it crashes into another car, I think, and it ends up going into the grandstand and it killed like 50, 60 people, blew up. The driver's killed, loads of. You look at the footage, the photograph before the accident, in the second, you look at the film stoppage, like how they do the old slow mos, and you see the slow mo, you actually see the car go in, you see the aftermath. You do not. If you are of a squeamish persuasion, you'll be going white. There is no censoring on this film. This film is not censored because it's been reconditioned. It's so old and so grainy. In the black and white, and there's some also colour footage as well. You cannot censor it because you will damage the film. It's that historically important. Um, yeah, Ken Miles in '67. The, the, the Ford versus Ferrari is about a decade later. I believe this was a Mercedes as well. And it's the same manufacturer that was killed Mark Webber when he flipped the car. Yeah. The Le Mans 24 hour, the Le Mans disaster is possibly the worst motorsport accident for. It did change how close fans could get to pit lane during races and where you position grandstands. They actually had to make changes, and because of that accident, Switzerland banned motorsport. You could not race in Switzerland, rallying, road racing, TT racing. Because of that accident, Switzerland banned motorsport. As in, you couldn't compete motorsport events in Switzerland. They had to be outside Switzerland. So Swiss race drivers had to move to France, or Germany, or Italy to get their race license to then compete. and it had massive consequences because that was the start of the safety drive in motorsport. Ironically, was not the deaths in F1, was that accident at Le Mans in the 50s where the car just there's two cars, they collide, one takes off and it flies into the crowd and bursts into a ball of flame, and it killed a lot of people. And the footage is completely unedited. It's just reconditioned film. They remastered the film basically. They've restored the film. And when they do the slow mo, you actually see the car collision and it takes off, and you can see it in the slow mo. And you see the crowd, and no one moves. There's no one moved. They're in shock with this flying, and it hits the crowd, ball of flame. So many people injured. So many people. That was the defining moment when they realised actually, while the sport's dangerous, it's now killing the fans. It's not just killing the drivers. It's killing the public, and that's when sort of the seeds of we've got to put the grandstands in a safer position. We've got to have rules on the width of the pit lane, the height barriers, safety barriers, gravel traps were a thing. We have to widen the tracks, maybe put the fans a bit further back in safer lane. That's why you have grandstands at racetracks now. That's why you don't have fans literally watching in the pit lane, and that's why you don't have wooden grandstands because they catch fire. But yeah, there was also I remember watching there's a snippet of Ford versus Ferrari where they're in the first race in the Ford GT40, the Shelby versus the standard GT40, and then you've got the Ford Mustang, and the driver in the standard, the Ford, the factory Ford backed GT40 team rams the Mustang, and the Mustang goes bang, and he comes in the pit lane and goes, what's the condition? What Mustang was that? How is the driver alive? Like literally, he's like, I think someone's just died in this race in a ball of flame. Like that's how calm they were. It wasn't like stop the race, we've got a dead driver. It was like, I think he's dead. How is the driver? And he carries on. He doesn't like, I'm not going to race anymore. He goes, I'm going to carry on. Different mentality in those days, and it started getting a bit ridiculous when the number of drivers killed at racing events was in double figures in a season per series. It just got too much. But when you got world champions like Jim Clark dying, and Ascari ended up in the Monaco, ended up crashing in Monaco into the harbour section. When you've got some of the best drivers in the world dying, or Niki Lauda getting nearly burnt alive, and these are world champions. These aren't just like a rookie driver in his first race. These are guys who are the best of the best. When they're dying and having near fate, then you know you've got a problem. And that's when the drivers briefing, you would have the drivers union basically would go, no, we're not happy with this. So that's why they don't race on the Nordschleife anymore. And that's why they don't race at Zandvoort anymore. And that's why they stopped racing in Imola for a while, is they're lethal. That's why they don't race at Brands Hatch. It's why Thruxton, the tyre compound has to be a harder compound. You cannot have a mixed compound race because a softer and medium compound would fall apart because the way that version is so abrasive on the tarmac at such high speeds that a softer compound tyre would literally disintegrate. There's a reason why certain tracks have special regulations for them, or certain types of motor race class don't go there. There's a reason why you know certain tracks with certain amendments made to certain, like the harbour chicane at Monaco has been changed because Jenson Button had a massive shunt coming out of the tunnel. And then Sergio Perez had a similar one after the change, and they had to adjust the chicane yet again. And that's the same section where Ascari crashed into the harbour and died. So that section has had, if you look at the footage of I think Graham Hill doing a lap in the late 60s, and he was a master of Monaco, he really was. That's Damon Hill's father, by the way. And it's been colorized, it's in color. And the harbour section, when he comes up the tunnel, it has changed. If you were to look at footage from last year's race, look at the changes that have happened since the 60s into the 70s, and you just look at the onboard, like you've got Senna. You could look at onboard camera from Senna or Prost or John Alesi or Schumacher, and you look at the onboard camera for each year from Graham Hill till last year, and you look at the changes they made to the tunnel the harbour section. They're done not to take away from the racing, but because of some high. And if it wasn't for the current safety standards that we have over the last 20 years, Jensen's Button's accident would have been fatal. Sergio Perez's accident would have been fatal. He would have got away with he got away with a concussion. He would have died. I have no doubt on that. Because you got that bump. But in the Formula E, they don't take the chicane. They take the straight section coming out the tunnel, and then their chicane's further down because they have a different layout. They use the escape road as their main back straight coming out the tunnel. But that is the fastest section at Monaco, going through into the tunnel and going flat out, and you go from daylight to dark to daylight, and then you've got the bump in the braking zone, and that has taken out so many cars in any era. Because guess what? It's public roads for 95% of the year. That's how people forget that Monaco isn't just a racetrack. That bit of Monaco, Monte Carlo, isn't just a racetrack, but that is public roads for the rest of the year, outside of the F1 and Formula E weekends. That is public roads for 90% of the year. There's like 3 weeks of the year where it is a racetrack, and the rest of the time there's drain covers they've got to cover up. They've got to take the race curbing down, the barriers. The rest of the year, that is a normal residential street. And people forget that. They genuinely do. And some of the accidents in that section and in the tunnel as well, there's been some big ones and coming out. That is the section which is the most dangerous at Monaco, because you're going at the highest speed on a very narrow section, coming out with an undulation change, a lighting change. There is a bump. You come out, you go into the tunnel on a curve, you gain speed on the curve. There are 2 racing lines for the tunnel that you can take. As you come out, you're going downhill, and then you're going into a chicane, and you're going from about 180 mile an hour to about 40 mile an hour in about 2.5 seconds. And in your braking zone, there is a bump, and it disrupts the car. So that'll be interesting to see with the current regs, the new regs they've got with F1. I love how this has become a motorsport history live stream. I love it. But with the new regs they've got in F1, it's going to be interesting to see with the cars bottoming out, like undulating like they are with the new aero package, how that's going to affect taking that section of Monaco. That's the fun bit. For me, the tunnel section into the harbour section is the best bit of the circuit. It is the most entertaining bit of the circuit for me. It's going to be interesting to see how the cars in that section and going up towards Rascasse from the pit, the start of the lap and the middle section of the lap, those 2 sections, how the cars are going to behave when they're accelerating up to Casino Square and when they're coming out of the tunnel into the harbour. It's going to be very interesting for me to see how the aero package, because it's a street circuit and it's a lower speed street circuit for the majority, so the downforce is going to be adjusted. But even so, how with the new regs, how the cars are going to behave in those 2 sections, coming up from the first corner up to Casino Square, going up the hill, and then coming down the hill into the harbour section. How those 2 sections are the fast bits at Monaco. The pit lane, pit straight, coming up to Casino, bang, you're fast up there, and then the tunnel to harbour section. That 35 seconds of lap in those 2 sectors, that for me is we're going to see the aero get really tested, because that's when they're going flat out. And for me, that could be a big test on the new regs with the new aero and chassis rules and side pod rules, because I can see there being some big accidents in those sections at higher speed with the new regulations. I could see a big shunt coming out the tunnel on lap 1 or following a safety car, and definitely that braking zone with the bump. If the cars are unstable going along on a flat straight where they're going up and down like that, imagine coming out of the tunnel on a curve and then you hitting a downhill straight section with a bump in the braking zone, with an already unstable oscillating car, which is basically what it is. Vertical oscillation, that's the term I was looking for. Yeah, it could be an engineer. With that unstable braking zone, and then you've got a sharp left and then a sharp right, how the cars are going to behave. There are some other chicanes and Spa as well. Monaco for those sections. I would think some of the other they're for me. I think if they do go to Portimao, that'll be interesting. But I would prefer Estoril for just Estoril. It's for me, it's a more iconic circuit. I think Mexico City as well would be interesting. Circuit of the Americas does have some elevation changes as well, but it's a more smooth circuit. But there are elevation changes at COTA, which I think again that's not been. I don't think that's been taken into consideration when they've been doing this aero package. That some of the tracks they go to aren't pure flat straight, and they're struggling on the flat straights going into more technical sections with the cars not being stable and moving around at higher speeds. Then you've got to factor in elevation changes and camber changes to corners. So COTA, Spa, and Monaco, for those sections I've noted where there are elevation changes and not truly flat. I mean, Spa and Monaco aren't truly flat, whereas COTA is a proper designs, not based off a street layout. I think that's if you are, because I've seen COTA with the NASCAR, and the NASCAR have had problems in the last couple of seasons at COTA as well in certain sections, especially if there's a wet session. I remember last season in NASCAR there was a lot of heavy rain at COTA, and I know normally they wouldn't race. They've got the rain tyres on, and they had no visibility on the back straight. So that's another concern I have with Circuit of the Americas is when it rains. And I've seen it in the GT Endurance Series. I've seen it in American touring cars. I've seen it in World Touring cars. I've seen it in Superbikes, the AMA. I've seen it in NASCAR. It doesn't matter what racing series it is. That back straight at COTA in the rain, there's an elevation change, and you cannot see. And the accident for Truex Jr. last year at COTA, bloody hell. Thank God for the current safety features that NASCAR have in place. Now, I haven't seen any races of the new gen cars, although I will be watching some in the coming. I've got some holiday, or you call it vacation. But I do remember they had to red flag the race for a period to try and drive the circuit because the visibility was that bad. You could not see the car on and the camera gives you a false idea because they have they have special thing, the lenses of cameras that when you film off this, it doesn't give you a true representation of what you actually see with your eyes. Even with the TV cameras, you couldn't work out what cars were, and that led to several accidents. And there was one where, was it Ryan Blaney? I can't remember who. Someone had already had an accident, and then Truex goes into them. They'd already hit the barrier, and then I don't know if it was Truex or someone went into Truex. But there's a car that's already, one car's checked up. I think it was Harvick. He gets rear-ended by another car that goes into the barrier, and then another car goes into the back of them at like 160, 170 mile an hour. They had no visibility, and that was, I think, the third incident on the back straight in that weekend. There was incidents in the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Cup Series, and a lot of it was to do with in the Truck Series and the Cup Series. They raced in full wet conditions. And in the Xfinity Series, there was some, because the drivers had qualified in the wet or done free practice. There was no practice, it was just qualifying and race. Because of lack of track time and the differing conditions over the weekend, some drivers were racing in all three series. You couldn't judge a braking point. And yeah, big accidents. Massive accidents. So when F1 goes to COTA, if there is rain, I'm not sold on these cars in wet conditions. If they're struggling in dry conditions under the new aero package with the cars moving around, imagine them in the wet. Because there's lower down, you lower the tyre pressures, there's less downforce, the tyres are cooler, the air temperature is generally cooler. COTA for me is going to be a big concern in the wet. So, Spa's always a mess in the wet. Spa's always we're not having a safety car race like we did last year. That was shambolic. But if they're racing at COTA and it is raining, I have grave reservations about. I know there's improved safety with the Halo device, but I have grave reservations. Don't get me wrong, I like seeing some of the accidents. It adds entertainment, the collisions, but I have grave reservations about the visibility down that back straight in the wet and the safety of avoidable accidents that you wouldn't have in the dry. You would be able to see the accident and try and avoid. If someone just reacts a bit too late, okay, you might have the odd little bang, but when you're rear-ending someone straight like that, and in the dry you would try and go to the side, you might clip them out as a glancing blow, and that's different. But when you're going full chat and you don't know a car is stationary in front of you, you're going full pedal to the metal, and you'll go. That can be like a 9. If that's lap 1 or lap 2, that's a 10 car pileup straight up. That's half the field wiped out. And I remember in the Harvick Truex, I think there was about 7 cars involved, and they were wrecked, and everyone walked away, which I thought was fantastic. 30 years ago, someone is not getting cut out of one of them cars. So the safety features that have come a long way in my lifetime are amazing. I've discussed this before, but I do have grave concerns again for NASCAR this year going there. The AMA Superbike package that they have, which I'm a big fan of. I have concerns about them in the wet there as well. I've got concerns about F1 going there and the GT endurance classes as well. If there is a wet race at COTA, I am not sold on that back straight in the wet. Even with you've got to have the flashing lights in the back of your vehicle, and even NASCAR has that rule now as well. If a car's been spun round, you can't see that red flashing light. You have to assume that the track ahead of you was clear, because your spotters, there will be spotters, will not be able to see a thing with the amount of spray that is brought up on that section. It's not good. And the Charlotte rival in the wet as well, it doesn't drain. Cars are aquaplaning. The front splitter is turning into a shovel. Makes it for fun racing, it does. I love the Charlotte rival. I like what they've done there. But again, it doesn't matter if it's the same with Daytona on the circuit, not the oval, the what you call the road course, as we would call it the circuit, you would call it the road course. When it rains at Daytona, and the same on the Charlotte Roval, the infield, again I have reservations about NASCAR and the NASCAR package and the GT endurance package racing there in the wet, because it's a bowl. The oval bits, water flows into the middle, and the drainage cannot cope with a heavy rainstorm. And again, the spray makes it very, very difficult. And if you go offline in the infield, you're going across the grass at 120, 130 mile an hour, and then you're a passenger. It doesn't matter how much you apply the handbrake or you. And another scary thing is if a car digs in front splitter and rolls, it's going to rip that car to pieces, and that can damage the chassis, and that can damage the roll cage with the sheer force going through it. You see it at Daytona and Talladega with some of the big accidents coming around the oval. It's exactly the same on the infield. If you've lost control of your car in the wet, because you can race, and your front splitter, the front aero digs in, you're getting airborne, and then you are a passenger then, and you've got to hope the people on the track have enough visibility to see you basically defecating yourself at 130 mile an hour, because you have no control at this point, and that they check up safely. But then you've got to hope that the vehicles behind know they're checking up with the spray and they don't hit someone. That's the reservations I have about certain circuits in the wet, is that their drainage isn't great. It's like Interlagos has got, when it rains there, you've got rivers going. Again, Interlagos is another circuit I think the aero package is going to be tested at as well. I think this is what I think Americans don't get about the European and South American motor racing enthusiasts. It's not just F1 we love. It's anything with 2 or 4 wheels. Even 3-wheelers can be raced. Even what you would call big rigs. Yes, we have truck racing. Yes, we race the trucks. Yeah. What you would call a big rig, we have a racing series for them. They're fun. Oh yes. Um, it doesn't matter if it's got two, three, four, six wheels. 'Cause that's what truck racing has. Actually, some of them have four wheels. We love watching them race. It's like rallying. It's like I have a thing for Scandinavian rallying where it's basically they've gone to a second-hand car lot, bought the cheapest car they can find, stuck a roll cage in it, put a skid pad underneath, and gone, okay, let's go around the woods in Scandinavia. Oh, let's go around the woods in Finland or Sweden. Write it off. Go, oh well, we can go back to the used car lot, get another one. Um, I never thought I would see a Volvo estate being rallied, but I have. I never thought I would see a C class or E class Mercedes being rallied. I have. I never thought I would see a Renault Megane Coupe rallied. I have. Some of the cars these guys, these privateer rally teams for what they call F Cup rallying, go out in. I wouldn't drag race these things. I would just scrap them. Um, I would never thought a BMW 330i compact from 1998 to 2004 would be rally worthy. It's not, by the way. Um, um, I never thought I would see a BMW M3 being rallied. I have. Um, um, team sport is. I think the sporting culture is different in North America. Absolutely. The way you have a franchise system and we have a club system where the club is part of the local community. So the youth system goes all the way down. We don't have a draft. It's from grassroots, school age level, all the way up to senior level. The club develops the youth itself. You have a draft system where they either go through college or the minors or the junior leagues to get developed, and then the big teams take them and have affiliate teams in the leagues below to develop. Um, I've done a video on the difference between North American and European sports cultures. Uh, it's just how the sports have evolved and what sports fans. I think golf's massive in America though. That's an individual sport, and tennis as well. A lot of tennis players base themselves in Miami or Texas or Arizona or California um, for their training camps. So tennis and golf are very big in the US as well. It's a very difficult one for me per se because while I follow the NHL. Of course, my favourite team is Canadian, so I can't comment on American football culture there. But a lot of Europeans, especially the NHL, Major League Soccer, have started their careers or been big names over here. Might go later on in their career as a free agent or play the majority. Because a lot of Europeans play in the NHL, some in the NBA as well, and in Major League Soccer. I think we're starting to bring our sporting culture over, and because the US, especially the US fans, are very interested in the European football association football, what you would call soccer. They've the last 20, 25 years, they've had a massive interest since the World Cup in '94. So 20. That's 28 years ago. That's ridiculous. I can remember it as yesterday. The interest has grown, and and then a certain moment happens. David Beckham leaves Real Madrid and goes to LA Galaxy, and that is the I think turning point. And then he's followed by Kaká later, and then Andrea Pirlo, and some other and Steven Gerrard and Lampard and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. But David Beckham already was gaining a lot of media attention globally because I think ESPN helps with that. But the MLS was struggling at the time, and then he makes the move to LA Galaxy. Now, it does help his wife was a very famous musician in Victoria Beckham in the Spice Girls, and that had a big following globally anyway. But because of that moment, Pele couldn't do it towards the end of his career with the Cosmos. George Best couldn't do it when he played over there. But the moment David Beckham goes over there and the way that the uh, the satellite TV deals, that is the moment, especially as the Glazers has already bought Man United, his former club anyway. The moment he signed for LA Galaxy and the Glazers buying into Man United, Gillette and Hicks buying into Liverpool, which is then sold on to the Fenway Sports Group. Randy Lerner buying Aston Villa. Some of the top American players playing in England and in Germany to a certain extent. So you've got players like Brad Friedel, legend Brad Friedel, we love him. Casey Keller, Brad Guzan's obviously played. Tim Howard, legend, but I love Tim Howard. He's a legendary player. Um, that helps sell the MLS to the US market more, and that saves the MLS from failure. Um, but then it also created even more interest in the European leagues because now you've got someone Americanizing English football. It really drew the interest outside of a very niche fan base in the US to hang on a second, let's bid for another World Cup. And the interest has exploded over the last 20 odd years in North Americans, especially in the US, buying into European football, not just English football, European football. And they understand. I think this is where there's a common misconception that North American sports fans don't get promotion relegation as part of our sporting culture. They do. They honestly do. Obviously it's a culture shock in a certain extent because the North American leagues don't have it. But when you sit down with a novice American fan and you teach them the history of the league or the sport or the club you follow, and they go, "Why was your club in League One?" And I've never actually told this to non American fans about Blackburn, but founders of the Football League, first team to win the FA Cup 5 times. True, very true. You know, the second club to actually win the Premier League, because the Premier League's only existed since '92, and there's a reason why the Premier League exists. It's not called Division One anymore. One of only 7 clubs to win the Premier League since its inception. And then we've had a couple of relegations and promotions, and then we ended up in League One. And I've never had to explain the promotion relegation, and I've never had the question from an American going, "League One, but you were in the Premier League at one point." I said, "Yes." I've never had to explain that. But if an American fan was to subscribe to the channel, like, well, if one of your friends, or a few of your friends, were to subscribe to the channel and want to understand the history of European sports clubs, and you go, "Well, why has this club not been in the top? Why are they not in the top division? They're relegated. They had to be promoted back up by a relegation promotion." And some of the other YouTube channels, I don't think describe it in the correct way, because I honestly believe the draft system in North American sports, you can't tank and get rewarded. Your current system still rewards failure. It doesn't punish it. You get rewarded. And while I understand the franchise system means you can't have promotion and relegation, the problem is over here now we have also started to reward failure with the parachute payment system. So you get a certain amount of payments, which you receive to cushion the blow financially because your revenues will be less in the league below for a number of seasons, depending on how long you were in the division above. And it's meant to help with the transition for, okay, you've lost some revenue with the TV money, ticket sales, you can't charge as much per ticket, etc., etc. So we still sort of reward failure, which is why clubs like Norwich and Fulham become yo-yo clubs where they get stuck, where they're too good for the Championship, but they're not good enough for the Premier League. And they go up and down, up and down, up and down, and they don't. And Fulham and Norwich were consistent in the Premier League for a while. And Norwich actually one of the founders of the Premier League back in the day in 1992. They were a very good side in the 80s and the 90s, and then it went a bit wrong, which is unfortunate. They just couldn't get it right off the field, and on the field, the team couldn't quite gel towards it, and it went a bit wrong. But there is a reason why they yo-yo between the two leagues. And then you've got Peterborough United in the Championship, who end up in League One quite a lot, and they bounce around the two leagues, and they can't. They're too good for League One. They're not good enough for the Championship. So you get this where in every level there's a club that will pop up and then go down and pop up and go down. They can't sustain themselves in the league above, but they're too good for the league below. And I think a lot of fans don't like tanking. It's a bad image, and yeah, you get rewarded for failure. I think the NRL is possibly the best league where they don't have a draft system, but they have no relegation, and if you lose, you really are in trouble. You really feel it. Well, you say less so in other sports. Rugby union, with their plans to ring fence, have gone down very badly with the majority of fans, from what I can tell on social media. Now, that may not be the utter case if we were to survey, but there's less money in rugby union. There's also less media attention in rugby union, apart from when it comes to the international teams, in regards to the club game. But I don't think it matters what the sport is, because the Czech Ice Hockey League has got promotion, the Swedish Ice Hockey League have got promotion and relegation. And ice hockey is a sporting model that shouldn't work, but it does, because they are very popular sports over there. Oh no, Ajaccio and Bastia in Corsica. One team's trying to get for promotion to top flight, and one team's trying to avoid relegation to the third tier. They hate each other. They want to be in the same division. They want to be playing against each other week in, week out, twice a season in the league and as many times as possible in the cup competitions. They really want to kill each other. That's one of the most nasty rivalries in global sport. But yeah, I think the way the draft lottery is set up, the way that you can tank to get a number one or at least a top 6 draft pick, even with the lottery odds, it's still rewarding failure. You can still be, rewarded. I understand how the salary cap system works, try and make things more even, but I would say if you're going to call it a lottery, make it a pure lottery for all 30 to 32 teams in the league, in the North American leagues. And fans go, what? That would stop tanking very quickly. If a Tampa Bay or a Tampa Bay Lightning or a Boston Red Sox could draft number one every year because they got the same odds of being pulled out in the lottery, because everyone is equal. It is literally blind luck. That would be what? And then you can't tank then. You cannot tank then. So if the NHL was to have a full lottery, which I think is the best way to get the first, they've only done it once, and that was after the 2004-2005 draft lockout, where it was a pure lottery who got the number one draft pick, which was Pittsburgh with Sidney Crosby. If all 32 teams have the same odds of a 1 in 32 chance of getting the first overall pick to the 32nd overall pick, I tell you now, tanking would stop like that. It would stop like that. Honest to God, it would stop. And then the teams that have been struggling would very quickly go, we need to get better quick. And then you would see less bad contracts on your books. The draft system and then the salary cap system work beautifully. You would see less bad contracts, which, like Carey Price's contract, is a death sentence for the Montreal Canadiens, the Habs. It's a death sentence for them. But yeah, the promotion relegation system is something that is unique to European and to a certain extent South American sport. And to a hardcore sports fan from North America who really, studies things and researches the history behind things, a proper sports nerd like me, you don't have to explain it. But to the hardcore American fan that's more interested in the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the NBA, but they're a casual fan, and because the games they see was Man United, Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea, whatever, and they look at the top 6, top 8, they're not really interested in the relegation fight, and they're the games they watch on NBCSN or ESPN or whatever network is carrying. I think it's NBCSN that's carrying the Premier League rights this season, and they don't really pay attention to the relegation fight. It is a culture shock to them. It's a massive culture shock to them, and I think with having someone like Tim Howard on the NBC Sports Network um, punditry team, because he's played over here, I think that's helping educate, especially I think the US fans, in how our system works and how it works. The unfortunate thing is we still have the parachute payment system, which cushions the blow of relegation. So you're not rewarded as much for failure, but you still get rewarded for sucking, basically. Um, but it's not as bad as the draft system, where you can be rewarded for being shit for years. You get a massive reward for tanking, and because you get a star player at the end of it, you get a top 6 draft picks in the NHL, for example. But they have changed the rules after Buffalo literally tanked for McDavid and got Eichel, and then there was the tank for Matthews as well. Those 2 years, they went, we're going to change the draft rules because the team was just not trying. Well, it wasn't the players' fault; it was by design, and it's not a good image. Look at Arizona in the last month; they have decided to. Well, they're on form; they're one of the form teams in the league. The way they started the season, it was looking like a complete mess. I mean, I know the arena issue is still people move the team. Is like, well, actually, currently they're selling out the Gila River Arena. You know why? Because the team is playing out of this. These guys are playing like their lives depend on it. Where has that been all season? If that was there all season, they're a playoff team. But they've gone into a deliberate rebuild, and they've got the Tempe deal. It's going to take a few years to build the arena, so they're going to spend 3 or 4 years in this university 5 to 6,000 seat arena, which is a shame. But I think they're going to pack it out and have a queue because they average about 13,000, so they're not going to have any issues reaching capacity with this arena. And I think it's going to be a more unique atmosphere, which I think a lot of North American fans are. It actually might be a very intense atmosphere in this one. You'll be surprised how much noise you can fit in a 5,000 seat arena. How intense it gets in a very intimate arena like that. I would say to any North American hockey fan, you've got to come over here to some of the small European arenas we have, and you realise how passionately and how enclosed it is, and how tight it is, and how very close you are to the action, and you'll be like, "Wow!" It is a culture shock because North American fans expect these massive arenas with loads of space. What people fail to realise is that we have stadiums and arenas that are very intimate and you're very close. Loftus Road, I think, is one of the most. And Prenton Park for Tranmere Rovers as well. Some of the most and Valley Parade for Bradford City. It's a bit of a rickety stadium, isn't it? The Bradford City Fire in '85. That's another sports disaster that is regularly overlooked because of what happened at Hillsborough. Shouldn't be. You are really right up against the pitch. You can almost touch the players. At QPR, you can actually physically, like your eye line is in line with the dugout. You could literally just lean on the dugout. You're that close to the players and coaching staff. It is a really Loftus Road. While it needs modernising and upgrading, that is a really intense atmosphere for a small stadium. That is hostile at Loftus Road. It's hostile at Valley Parade. It's hostile at Prenton Park. These are some of the smaller Football League stadiums. And the scary thing is, Valley Parade and Loftus Road have been Premier League stadiums. They are hostile. They are not pleasant places to go and visit as an away team when they're packed out and the fan base is baying for you. You know, they are hostile. And I don't think North American fans realise how close you can get, how some of these stadiums, older stadiums, you're very, very close. It is different. It's just different. When you've got a packed out Loftus Road, for a stadium that I've been to, that is a really, really intimidating atmosphere. Really not pleasant if you're the away fan or you're the away team. They've even played international rugby league at Loftus Road. It is a very intense little stadium. It's a fun stadium to get to. It's an interesting part of London, Queens Park Rangers, but that stadium, I mean, in there it is a hostile little ground. And you wouldn't realise it's a championship stadium that's been a Premier League quality stadium. But Selhurst Park, that's a very hostile atmosphere there. Oh, that's really cost. There's some. How many football stadiums we say in London per square mile? Ooh, wow, um, lots, um, lots. I could name about 15, 16 teams that play professionally from the National League, which is the old conference, which is the fifth tier, all the way to the Premier League. There's about fifth. You could have your own professional football league of 20, I think at least 15 to 20 teams out of London alone. Um, I couldn't tell you how many per square mile. I really couldn't. Um, but that you could make your own London league out of the teams there. Chester, there is a lot of disgruntled fans surrounding rugby and ring fence league. So I imagine ring fencing football league, there'll be uproar. That's why the European Super Leagues didn't want to, did they just didn't work. Do most London teams have their own stadiums or do they share? No, most some have ground shared for various reasons. So QPR has been ground shared by a couple of clubs, and Selhurst Park has been ground shared. Wimbledon had issues with Plough Lane, their traditional home, which they've now rebuilt, thankfully. So they had to ground share with Palace at Selhurst Park for a while, and that wasn't um, a, was an unfortunate thing in the 90s, and it was a long and but they finally got Plough Lane back in Wimbledon, which is southwest London. Loftus Road, when Fulham were having Craven Cottage, the main stand redeveloped. They couldn't have the capacities they wanted. They had to share Selhurst. They had to share Loftus Road with QPR for a couple of seasons. So I've seen Fulham home games at both Craven Cottage and Loftus Road, which is really weird. Even though they could have ground shared with Chelsea, um, they could have. Um, uh, there have been a couple. There have been. It, stadium ownership is a very tricky issue. Not every club owns their stadium, which is a problem. Some of them have to rent their stadiums, and so there's issues when they want to redevelop. They're leasing their stadium to a holding company. Um, Brentford own their own stadium. The old Griffin Park, that was an intimidating atmosphere there. That was a really intimidating little stadium. The new stadium is a fantastic facility, though. We're talking about teams sharing stadiums. At the moment, no London club share stadiums. There was a while where Wimbledon until Plough Lane was sharing with um, Kingston. What was it? Kingston Hampton United or wherever it was, where the Chelsea ladies play. They were ground sharing with the Chelsea ladies home ground. Um, but now they've got Plough Lane rebuilt, which long overdue. That's a fantastic new facility for the level they are playing at. Of course, Wimbledon used to be a Premier League club, and then of course they became MK Dons. The original Wimbledon became MK Dons, and the National Hockey Stadium, which is now MK Stadium MK, which used to be the National Hockey Arena, field hockey, um, is a Premier League standard stadium in League Two. Yeah, it didn't work out for MK Dons, did it? But yeah, no, there's multiple clubs at various points for stadium redevelopment or stadium issues have had to ground share. Um, that's ridiculous. The rugby Premiership, the rules are wrong, absolutely wrong, they're actually killing themselves because you've now had two salary cap breaches in the Saracens, which used to be London Saracens, now it's Saracens because that's the thing, um, and the Leicester Tigers, and that's a bad image. But now they're trying to ring fence for a variety of reasons by underhand means, and that's damaging the image and the reputation. Why doesn't the RFU step in? It's the wealthiest union in the world. Remember this, and help support the clubs to get their capacities up by giving them grants or helping them by sharing some of the cost of upgrading the grounds, like Ealing, for example, Trailfire is only so they can meet these stupid, ridiculous standards. Because until that happens, unfortunately, the professional game in this country is slowly killing itself. It is. Rugby league has similar issues, um, and it, a lot of it's to do with the TV rights and promoting the sport to a wider audience. Um, and I think rugby league has definitely got that wrong badly. Why was there no uproar? Um, well, there sort of was because it affected the local teams around Coventry and the whole Ricoh Arena situation with Coventry City uh, and in the football club and Wasps, Midland Wasps. Um, the issues over the Ricoh, I'm not an expert on everything, but I know it's been a complete mess from day one when they left Highfield Road. There has been some uproar, and the stadium issue, and then who gets to play there, the ground share between Coventry and Wasps. There's been issues over that with the Sisu. Wasps now own the stadium, so they rent on match days. I think both clubs should step in and work together and jointly own the stadium 50-50. They're both going to use it. They might as well jointly help each other. Um, there was some, but I think the the problem is there were too many teams in London. London Welsh went out of business, um, which should never have happened. Um, quite honestly, the RFU is a shambles. Similar with the Welsh Rugby Union as well. The WRU is a shambles for different reasons, but it's jobs for the old boys' jobs for the boys, isn't it? We're not going to get structural changes that are required in rugby union and in rugby league until there is a mass clear out of the old boys club because that's what it is. It's jobs for your mates. There, there has been year upon year upon year of really poor governance within both codes of the sport. Massive wastage of money, shocking wastage of money, in my opinion. But that's my opinion on that. Misplaced investment, and some really poor marketing and TV deals signed that actually really, really, basically some very, very poor business decisions being taken over many, many years. And I fear that it's only going to continue because the old boys club, they're making money out of this. But the situation at Clubland is quite worrying, if I'm being honest. Very worrying for me. Um, but we'll have to see what happens. We really do. But there needs to be massive, massive overhaul in the governance side and administration side of the sport, both codes, because I think both rugby league and rugby union in this country, and I think to a certain extent globally, are being chronically mismanaged for a very, very long time. And there are issues that were easily fixable if properly looked at, and they haven't been for a very long time. And it's led to a lot of problems where small issues have become bigger issues. No one's had the bravery of all the places they chose. They chose the Midlands, which has mostly Worcester, Leicester, Coventry, and Nottingham, and more. Why not East? East Anglia really is a weird. It's East Anglia is not the wealthiest part of the UK. Let's just say that. Um, outside Norwich and Ipswich, Norfolk and Suffolk, very rural. Large parts of Lincolnshire is very rural, and doesn't have a high average salary. And there's not the corporate money. You don't have enough outside Norwich, for example, and the south coast of Suffolk and into Essex. Outside Norwich, um, there isn't a lot of corporate money. So apart from Aviva and Coleman's Mustard, quite and Lotus, who already have major sponsorship agreements with Norwich City, and in motor racing, for example, outside of they've already tied up their sponsorship arrangements for sports. So outside of that, there isn't a lot of corporate money in East Anglia. That's the problem. Um, the Northwest, you've already got Sale up there. You've already got Sale. And to be fair, the Northwest is football and rugby league country, and to a certain extent cricket. And again, while there is a bigger population in the Northwest, there are huge parts of the Northwest that are not very wealthy. And again, it's not there's a lack of population. There's a massive population in the Northwest, but it's the disposable income and the corporate money is already heavily tied up in football, to a certain extent rugby league, and to a certain extent cricket with the sponsorship. You want to put Rugby Union Club to rival Sale, for example, and grow the game. There's a problem there because where do you locate it? Do you put it in Liverpool? Not going to happen. There's no stadium for them to play it. Do you put it in Preston? Do you put it in Lancaster? You're running out of options very, very quickly because Morecambe doesn't have the population size, neither does Fleetwood. Blackburn is a football mad city, well, town. Burnley is a football mad town, but is exceptionally deprived economically. It's one of the poorest areas of the UK. Accrington is football country. You're not going to have any chance in Accrington. Again, a very poor location. Um, so it wouldn't work because Manchester's already a very congested sports market where all the major sports are played: ice hockey, cricket, rugby union, rugby league, obviously football. Liverpool is a football mad city. Rugby league has tried and failed there, but you've got St Helens on the outskirts. There's no stadiums available in Liverpool. You couldn't ground share at St Helens. You just don't have the infrastructure. The pitch would be in pieces. Wigan is football and rugby league mad. It's a rugby league town, really. Football's a secondary. Um, and then you really start. While Manchester and Liverpool are the economic hubs of the Northwest, they're already a heavily saturated sports market with very established, successful teams already in those markets. So that's your problem there. And then the rest of Northwest, Lancaster's a university town, so it could work, but there's not the population there. It's a tiny population compared to some of the other towns and cities in Lancashire in the north and Greater Manchester and Liverpool, Merseyside. So you're already limited in your options. Your only option really is to put a team in Lancaster, maybe Preston because of the university connection. Preston would probably be the best bet, but only Deepdale's a decent stadium. And I'm not sure Preston North End want to have their pitch turned into a mud bath by a rugby union club. It's just not there isn't the infrastructure. Yes, they had rugby union in South Yorkshire. It's called Leeds Carnegie, or now Yorkshire Carnegie. They are doing really badly right now. Really bad. They've got the stadium. They're now in the third tier of English rugby. They were a decent Premiership side back in the day, but it's gone horribly wrong for what was Leeds, which is now Yorkshire Carnegie. Doncaster and what was the other one? There was another one. Was it Rotherham? It was Rotherham. Have had decent attempts of trying to get to the top tier, but they're football towns. Let's be honest, and rugby league towns. Yeah, absolutely, but they're football mad. The South Coast is cricket football. And again, you just don't have the available stadium infrastructure to do it. Unless you decide to go back to the Whitdean in Brighton and put a team there, which didn't work for football very well for Brighton and Hove Albion. They had a lot of financial problems while they'll be building the Amex. Whitdean was a temporary home for them, then become semi-permanent. They made a mess of that. There is no infrastructure in place. You would have to build a brand new stadium of a minimum 10,001 seater capacity from scratch. And where's that money going to come from? And what local council is going to go, you know what, we need to build 800 homes a year. Let's put a rugby union stadium and put a team there. So automatically you're limiting yourself. I'm not sure Southampton want to have St Mary's turn into a mud bath every other weekend. I'm not sure Fratton Park is, well, it's got the capacity and they've redone the pitch. It doesn't have that weird, slope in the middle. It's not, pitch size isn't big enough for rugby union. You wouldn't have any end zones. You wouldn't have any try zones. dead ball areas. Um, Bournemouth Stadium would meet the capacity standard, but again, is on the small side pitch wise. The Amex has hosted rugby union. You could put a team in Brighton, absolutely, but whether Brighton Hove Albion would be happy to ground share like Reading were with London Irish for many years, that's a difficult one. They've tried Vicarage Road, and they've tried Wycombe Wanderers Stadium as well as being used by Wasps and Saracens. Um, the Cassan was used by London Welsh in their two Premiership seasons because it just meets the standard, and that's a three-stand stadium with ample parking, by the way. So you're already limiting yourself. You would have to build a stadium from scratch because there's only, I think, two stadiums on the south coast, the Amex and St Mary's, that I think are up to the standard to have Premiership Rugby Union. Now the Amex has hosted internationals. St Mary's is that the Amex is the only. I would say St Mary's would be a second best option, but that's your problem. That is your problem. Plymouth Argyle, their stadium is big enough, but again, the playing surface would be destroyed. Ashton Gate is shared by the Bristol Bears and Bristol City. Bath used the Rec, which has been used for football as well. You don't have the stadium infrastructure. You only have two stadiums on the south coast that I think could host. Because St Mary's is similar in design to the Medeski, so you could get a rugby union pitch there. But the problem is you've only got two stadiums on the south coast which you wouldn't be able to fully fill. You would not be able to fully fill them every match day weekend. Yeah, Castleford and Wakefield. It is known they need stadium redevelopment. Now, Wakefield Trinity Wildcats want to redevelop their stadium. They have money concerns. So, if you're talking about, putting a team on the south coast, rugby union. When Blues had Coventry shared our stadium, it looked like a mud bath, and that was a football team. Yeah, true. No, in all honesty, and I'm being honest here, if you were to put a rugby union or even a rugby league team on the south coast, there are only two options of stadiums which you could use, maybe three, and they're all football stadiums. Now, while the owners of both stadiums, I think Southampton own St Mary's. Actually, Southampton own St Mary's. I think Brighton own the Amex, and Bournemouth own the Vitality. While I think the club owners would be really happy with the extra revenue, would you be able to get with what the rugby club would be paying? But could you then offset for the rugby club side of things? Would they make enough profit that they wouldn't even sell out the stadium? That's the problem. Other cities like Exeter, Sandy Park is a separate stadium from St James's Park in Exeter. They're at different ends of the city. Leicester, Welford Road, with the King Power, formerly Filbert Street, which was the old stadium. They've had separate stadiums from day one. And this is Northampton, separate stadiums, both football club and rugby club, different separate stadiums. So already you are going to have a problem, and a lot of teams have done the ground share. Be it rugby and rugby league, Harlequins did it with London Broncos for a while in partnership. Multiple football clubs have shared stadiums of Union and league. Wigan's a prime example where that does work for league and football with Wigan Athletic and the Wigan Warriors. But there is a problem with stadium infrastructure for both codes of rugby. There really is. How do you fix that? I don't know. If you were to put a team on the south coast, there are two, possibly three stadiums, be it league or union, where you could put a team with basically more modern stadiums. So the Vitality at Bournemouth is pretty decent. They've done some recent modernisation there. You've got St Mary's, which is nearly 20 years old. I think it is 20 years old this year. It's a nice stadium, but it's starting to look a little bit tired in places. And then you've got the Amex, which is relatively new, but you're putting yourself in a position where that's your limit on the south coast. Um, Fratton Park in Portsmouth. It's a mob. While they've redone the pitch and the pitch is now at a good standard, the parking's horrendous. When it rains there, your cars start to sink in the mud because of how Southsea Island is what it's made of. Basically, it's shingle and gravel. Basically, is the undersoil. It's slowly sinking into the so infrastructure around the stadium. Now, Brighton has good road links from the train station on a bus route for the Amex. It's well signposted. St Mary's literally is right by the train station. Doesn't matter if you're going to Southampton Central or actually St Mary's itself. There's good transport links to St Mary's. Bournemouth with the Vitality, it's on the bus route. So you get the train in, and then you get a bus there. So again, it's in a good location to get to. Much like the Medeski, there's a park and ride system. Yeah, technically Plymouth, Argyle's ground that would be destroyed. The pitch is not good enough at Argyle's ground for dual use. And the stadium is old and tired and needs a lot of love. And while Plymouth Argyle would love the extra income, they've had financial issues, would definitely love it. I'm not sure relocate the Cornish Pirates there is the best idea because that's Cornwall's team. And they play in Truro. We'll have to see what happens. I understand that in principle and the idea, it's a very, very good idea, but in practicality, you are limiting. Yes, but it doesn't meet Premiership standards. So if you want to relocate a team or encourage growth, they don't have the crowd numbers and they don't have the facilities already in place. And if you were to go right with moving one of the teams outside London, you're not going to touch Harlequins. I doubt you will touch London Irish now. So what do you do? London Welsh have gone out of business. You just put a brand new team in. Doesn't work that way. And the cities that are being discussed are football cities through and through. Through and through, they're football cities. So already, and Southampton have got the Rose Bowl as well. So they're football and cricket cities, well established. Already, you're on the back foot trying to. While the Amex hosted the Rugby Union World Cup matches, and obviously you had the great victory for Japan over South Africa with a sellout crowd, and the locals did buy into that in Brighton. It's a very progressive city, Brighton. There are other issues within Brighton itself socially that need fixing. So, yeah, even Plymouth's a football mad city. So you already have got the established sports there that are going to be very, very hard to dislodge and then attract new fans to that location. And while in principle, the idea is a brilliant idea, in practice, I'm not sure relocating, let's say, London Irish to Southampton and calling them the Exiles, just the Exiles, or Harlequins out the stoop, which will never happen ever because they own their stadium. I'm not sure it's going to work because London Scottish have gone down the divisions. London Welsh don't exist anymore. London Japanese, that's one. They could go to Brighton because obviously the history of Japanese rugby with the Amex and the defeat to Africa. But already you are limiting yourself with the teams in London because London Scottish play at Esher Rugby Club. They ground share with Esher. The other teams already have very good arrangements or own their own stadiums. So I don't. It is what it is. If you were to start a team from scratch, Plymouth already have a team. There is rugby union played in Sussex and Hampshire and Surrey and Kent and Dorset and Somerset and Devon. But it is not as popular as football and it's not as popular as cricket. Somerset have got a great cricket setup. Even though it's probably best since the players called up or washed up and shouldn't be there. Have you seen England friendlies are now being shown on Sky Sports? Thought they were protected. To be brutally honest, eh, I don't watch friendlies anymore. I think they're farcical. They don't mean anything. They're unnecessary games where players get injured. I think that's why Premiership is happy to ring fence. There are 13 big rugby teams and fans. The other clubs have. I wouldn't say that. I think the issue is you don't get that Exeter story anymore. You don't get what Exeter have done. It doesn't happen. Um, and Bedford get good crowds, and they did get good crowds when they were in the Championship. Um, and their stadium does meet the requirement. The problem is you're harming the development because if you can get a team promoted, you can get the casual fan in the location become a permanent fan. Success brings in attention. Perceived growth brings in the casual fan, brings them attention. And this is where I think the rugby pyramid has got it wrong. And Premiership Rugby and the RFU have got it wrong. And it's an odd team league, so you need an even team league. So they need a 14th team in there. And whether you can go Bedford, Doncaster, resurrecting London Welsh with RFU assistance. Bear in mind, Northampton Saints, Newcastle, Worcester, Harlequins, London Irish have all been outside the Premiership in my lifetime. They've all been relegated out and have come back. I think they'll go to 14, whether it's Pirates or Doncaster. They'll call it a close up and win. It's the wrong way to go about it. It is the wrong way to go about it. And the problem is they've got professionalism wrong. As in the implementation of professionalism, the cost certainty, the fact the salary cap has been blatantly and openly breached without real consequence with the teams that are doing it. If Saracens didn't get promoted back, they wouldn't have ring fenced the Premiership. That's the nastiness behind this whole thing. I understand why neither Premiership or Super League are trying to win South Yorkshire. Yorkshire in general, big county. Again, it's really poor, governance and seeking out and try and because if you have the two leagues competing against each other, rugby league and rugby union, the two sports, it improves competition and then more people want to play because there's that lack of competition. It's just difference, and it's really shocking governance. It's really shocking how the money's been badly invested, wasted, and the TV deals are crap, in my opinion. It's jobs for it's the old boys club. It's jobs for the boys. Same with the RFL. Same with the FA. It's almost a closed shop within these organisations where you've got a mate who's been in the corporate world and you bring him in. You've got a mate on the board, you promote them. It's jobs for the boys. Sheffield is football's heartland. Neither side will win. Yeah, Sheffield's a sports man city anyway. You've got the Sheffield Eagles in rugby league. Who've got a great history in the Challenge Cup. You've got two historical football clubs who've hit lean times in recent years, but you've got Sheffield United, Sheffield Wednesday. You've got two professional ice hockey teams. You've got the Olympic swimming program. You've got a big part of the UK cycling program is based out there. You've got the university sports. Sheffield. Oh yeah, they are. And the Sheffield Steel Dogs play out the secondary, which still seats 5,500 people, which is the Steelers' secondary arena if should they need it for whatever reason. So you've got two professional ice hockey teams, you've got two professional football clubs, you've got a professional rugby league club, you've got the Olympic programs are based out of Sheffield and Loughborough to a certain. They split between Loughborough and Sheffield. The UK swimming program, you've got a big part of the cycling program. A lot of road race teams are also based out of Sheffield. There is a lot of sport to do with the university and professional sport in Sheffield, and rugby union is missing a trick there because you've got a vibrant young student population. You've already got the sports investment there, and they've missed a trick because university. Guess what's played at university? Rugby union. They've missed it. They've missed a trick there. Can you see Twickenham having a chunk of the stadium empty because of Eddie Jones still being in a job and the RFU doing nothing? They need a message sent to them. Look at the ticket price and look what happened with Wales against France on the Friday night game with 10,000 empty seats. They couldn't even sell out on the final on the weekend against Italy. So ticket price has to be taken into account, and I think that's why rugby union is still seen as elitist compared to rugby league, and will always be the case. Even though it's a false stereotype, that is a massive problem. And there's a couple of lads I work with. Who one of them plays amateur rugby at one of the local at the Reading Rams Rugby Club, which is actually in Charville, which is part of Twyford, by the way. Not actually at Reading; it's actually Twyford. Nice little stadium, actually. Nice little facility. The big problem you have is the RFU board have said they're backing him. The problem is, who do you get to replace him? That's another issue that you have in this World Cup cycle. He's contracted to the World Cup anyway. And because he got to the World Cup final, they extended his contract by 2 years. So there's a severance payout that they don't want to pay. And over £100 lowest tickets, and they went, yeah, I think 250 quid was the average ticket price to Twickenham for that match. Now, I've been to Twickenham on the double, the old London double header days back in the day when you could see Quins versus Irish and Saracens play Wasps. So I've done that, and I've been to see the old Tetley, which is the old FA Cup version of rugby union, the old Tetley Cup final between Newcastle and Harlequins. So I've been to Twickenham 3 or 4 times. I think 3 times. Now, it's a fantastic facility. It really is a fantastic facility. One of the best stadiums I've ever been to. But ticket price is definitely the Welsh Union have tried to cash in as well, and it backfired in the last 2 home games where they've had empty seats. A combined total of that between the 2 games against France and Italy, which they lost both of them. They did the one on the Friday night, and the one of them was the lunchtime game. So the timings of the games were wrong as well. They couldn't sell out 2 games in a row at home in a stadium they regularly sell out for tier 1 internationals. So 6 Nations and then the Autumn Internationals, they regularly sell that stadium out. They've not sold out 2 home games concurrently. And you look at the ticket price the WRU are charging, and then you look at the concession price for beer and food, and you're like, oh dear. And they didn't even sell out all the Autumn Internationals. There's definitely, I think COVID's had an impact on it to a certain extent. Of course, you've got the cost of living crisis as well, which has to be factored in, but the ticket price. The Welsh Union's broke. It's got no money. They're bankrupt. They're bankrupt. And in my opinion, the backlash against the Welsh Union for the last 2 matches, not the fact they lost them both is one thing, and they lost, and so that's got to take into consideration that they've lost them both. But the ticket price and having it set for TV, the match times being set for TV, where they knew come the final round that they weren't going to be playing for the title, and they knew Italy were going to get the wooden spoon. So that's the first match because no one really cares. It's the best match of the weekend, and they got a negative result. They've lost. So this is what I don't understand. They can't sell out against one of the best teams in the world, against France, and they can't sell out against an improving side that actually beats them. They can't sell out against 2 of their rivals, basically, in the 6 Nations. They can't sell out, and they're beaten in both games. They got the ticket price wrong. I think there could be a point where an ex-player or an ex-coach does it free for pride. No, I think the reason why they're sticking with Eddie Jones is if this was last year or the year before, he's out of job. I honestly believe that. Um, they don't want to. They've extended his contract, and they don't want to pay the severance fee. I don't know how much his contract's worth and what they're paying him. Now, I don't think Eddie Jones is a bad coach. I'm gonna say that. I will say this though: his style of coaching suits a Japan or a Uruguay or a USA, like a developing tier two, lower tier one nation, than an upper tier one nation. Because the game has evolved since his time in the Australian job back in the early 2000s. The sport has evolved. The style of game, the style of player, the rules have changed. His style of coaching suits right now a developing tier two nation, like a Georgia or Romania, not a tier one nation. It wouldn't even suit Italy, to be fair. His style of coaching right now, with his conservative style of coaching, suited Japan to the ground. And South Africa play that style, that strong defensive power game style anyway, where he was an assistant. And Australia, back in the early 2000s, already had a star-studded lineup that selected itself. They had just won their second World Cup in '99. We didn't have to do too much because they had the talent there, and the money was and the contract, the professional game was working. Australia were the best team in the world at the time. I think if Ben Young's daily and no liner, Radwan or Quirk for summer, I think there's definitely mounting pressure on his position, and I think he knows he's under pressure. He knows that he could be gone before the World Cup. He's also missing his captain, which I think has led to a leadership vacuum. And Courtney Lawes missed a couple of games, so that affected the captaincy and the leadership. Whether you agree or like or dislike Owen Farrell in the 10 or 12 jersey is irrelevant. He's the captain. He's an experienced player, regardless of how he's playing. He's still the leader of that side. But I look at the social media, and even mainstream journalists are going, "This is a bit of a problem." Now, I've been asked the question who could be brought in either as an assistant or as a replacement coach. There's not many options available. Now, he's the first overseas coach England have ever had. And when he was appointed, people were like, we've never appointed an overseas coach from rugby union before. Football and rugby league and cricket, yes, we've done that, and we've had mixed results. Okay, mixed success. But rugby union had never gone down the overseas path, whereas the other unions, Italy, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, have all had overseas coaches and still do to this day, apart from Scotland, but have done in the past. France have never gone with an overseas coach either. So either that's an issue with the talent of coaching we've got in this country in the last, how long's Eddie Jones been? The last 7 years. In the last 7 years, we've got an issue with coaching quality, which I don't think is the case. Or no coach wants to risk their reputation with a misfiring test side and the criticism and the pressure that comes with it. Now, whoever comes in, I think Eddie Jones is done after World Cup regardless. Whether he goes before or after is not the problem. It's the thing is with Edwards and Farrell, their rugby league backgrounds. Now, Farrell did play a bit of union, obviously, with England and was an assistant to Stuart Lancaster. And yes, they are English, but they have rugby league backgrounds. Now, when Farrell was playing and then an assistant coach for England, obviously they converted him. He was a cross-code international. And we've had Jason Robinson and Chris Ashton as well. So we've had some ex-league players who have played union for the national side. Vinacolo, for example, dual code international. And Sam Burgess was a real disaster in 2014, 2015. real disaster, that experiment. He should be playing as a number 8 rather than in the centres. In my opinion, they should convert him into a number 8 because he needs the hand. He needs to be a destructive ball runner. He barely touched the ball. So, in my opinion, when the England setup has lost Christian Wade to the NFL, that was a massive, stupid mistake on England's part when he decided to go, you know what, I'm the top try scorer in Premiership history now, going past Varndell. I don't feel valued. I'm going to change sports altogether because I don't feel valued by the system. I'm putting in the performances on the pitch. I'm not getting selected, and that's a problem. When you've lost the top try scorer in Premiership history, not only to a different sport together, because they don't feel valued, because that then sums up England's selection problems that predate Eddie Jones. That predates Eddie Jones. So that tells you that the issues with selection go back Stuart Lancaster, Ashton maybe, Martin Johnson, Woodward. I think Woodward and Johnson selected the best players available. I think Ashton through to Lancaster and onto Eddie Jones have missed a trick. There's not enough extra players, I think, getting a run out in the side. That players from Bath are getting selected. They're in the bottom 2 right now. Worcester are actually playing better than Bath if you look at it. How can a team at the bottom of the Premiership be having players selected for the Test side when their league form is so diabolical? That one is a mystery to me. Don't ask me why, but that is a complete and utter mystery to me. That Bath players are being selected, but no Worcester players aren't. So that's like why you playing for the old-fashioned Worcester Warrior players aren't. That makes sort of sense to me. No Newcastle players have been selected. That makes no sense to me. And Toby Flood is still a half decent fly half. If you need an emergency fly half to come in for a test, I would have no problem with Toby Flood coming in for a test match should there be an injury. That's where I think a player like Toby Flood coming in to give guidance to Marcus Smith while Owen Farrell is out, just to have him in the squad. He doesn't have to play in games, just to be around and guide him, saying, look, I was your age once. I was a young fly half inside centre, playing at this level when I was the same age. This is how I dealt with it. And Exeter, I can understand, Baxter not wanting to have his best players. Look at Jack Nowell; he keeps getting injured on England duty, and that's got to be frustrating for the Exeter, backs of the Exeter coach. But at the same time, they're missing out on, international experience, which is harming the England side. Now, the club country debate needs to be solved because I look at that England squad and there are Bath players in it. And for me, that shouldn't be happening with how Bath are playing right now. There are no Newcastle players in the squad. That should not be happening. There's no London Irish players in the squad. That shouldn't be happening. I'm sorry, but why are Bath players getting selected above players who are playing for Bristol? I think there were some Bristol players actually in the England squad, but let's say Bristol or London Irish, even Worcester, Newcastle, who are playing better than Bath right now, because it's a ring fence, no one's getting relegated, right? But they're not getting selected, but Bath players are. What influence does Bath have over the RFU selectors? Come on, let's be honest here. We need to have a serious conversation. What influence does a team like Bath have over England selection? Teams like Exeter and Worcester, the less fashionable clubs. Although Exeter's now a bit of a fashionable club to go play for, but think about this. Think about this just for a moment. I think certain clubs have a bit too much power and influence within the RFU and the selection bodies, of the national side. And I think that needs to change. And whether the owner of Exeter doesn't want his best players get bashed up and broken, which seems to happen a lot with Jack Noel, there are other good Exeter players who should be at least getting international experience, even if it's a handful of caps in their career. It does not matter to me. If he stays in that summer tour squad, it's the same crap as we've just seen. They might do it. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens, and that's all I can say on that. Is just we'll have to wait and see what they play like, and what the quality is like in the summer. If any more of the young players get a run out, if I have to admit, I think certain clubs have far too much influence when it comes to the RFU and selection. Because in my mind, not a single Bath player, with how the team is playing, should be anywhere near that squad right now. Not a single Bath player. If teams like Worcester, who are at the same level of Bath at right now, in form and quality, yeah, Bath players are getting in, but Worcester for most of the season have been above Bath in the league. I think above them right now. That just doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. How the worst team in the league can have an international with it, whereas teams above them don't. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. That says to me that the unfashionable clubs, for whatever reason, either protecting their players and making sure they've got their best players on the field to compete in the league, or they just don't have that influence over the RFU like a team like Bath does. That really makes me scratch my head. I don't think there was a single London Irish player in that squad either. How? Not a single Newcastle player. I'm starting to have some questions about the I am having some questions about the selection policy of the England national side. And the influence some of the clubs, the fashionable clubs. I'm not. Did he play? No. Did he actually play a game? Nope. Not that I could tell. But that to me is a head scratcher. Either you select players from the whole Premiership into your training squad, and then you choose the best out of them on the training paddock that show the most promise, or you select players on form, not on reputation of the club they play for. Because if relegation was on this season, Bath are going down, in my opinion. There is again rewarding failure by protecting failure. That's a problem with ring fencing. You're going to get some teams that just don't try because they know they're not going to get relegated. For whatever's going on at Bath, and I can't tell you what's happened at Bath. I just look at the league table and go, there's something wrong there. Something has happened within the culture and the DNA of that team for them to be going from one of the country's best teams historically in the 90s and the early 2000s to one of the worst right now in the top level. Something has gone horribly wrong at Bath, and that shouldn't be the case. With the success and the history that club has had and the consistency that club has had for so long, what has gone wrong at Bath? Why are they so bad? You have to question what's going on there. And I know obviously Bath had the massive cocaine scandal a decade or so ago, and it derailed some players' careers. And Matt Stevens, who was a key part of England's front row at the time, was the player, in my opinion, thrown under the bus. And yeah, look, he was the player who got screwed over. And the culture of that club, yeah, it is arrogant. It is arrogant. Um, but it is what it is. Like, obviously, something has gone horribly wrong there, and it's not easily fixed. Well, I don't think it's the same with Man United in football. It's not an easy fix. Same with Everton. It's not an easy fix. There's obviously structural problems at the club. There's obviously a culture issue at the club. There's obviously a recruitment issue at the club. Um, a whole multitude of things may have gone wrong. And that doesn't happen overnight. That is a long process of a negative, toxic, arrogant kind of culture. Um, and yeah, Bath is one of the more affluent areas in the country. There is no doubt. That's a very affluent little city. But I will say this: the fans are loyal. I'm not gonna lie. The fans are, they turn up. They've got the disposable income for now because the living crisis. Obviously, they've got the disposable income. Spend their hard-earned cash. They work. I nearly moved to Bath back in the day. Nearly did. Well, I can't think of it. Ugh. I've been to Bath. It's a lovely little city. The people are really friendly in Bath as well. It's a beautiful little city. It's a nest egg hidden away. It's such a lovely place. The people down there are really friendly, very welcoming. But yeah, they have an affluent fan base, and they are mugging their fans off with the perform. I mean, when I used to, like, when obviously Bath would play, let's say, Harlequins, or London Irish, and I, especially Harlequins at the Stoop, and I'd be my ex-partner at the time, partner at the time lived in Sunbury, so West London. So I had to go to Twickenham station to change trains, or Richmond, or St Margaret's to change trains, and then go to. Sometimes I had to take up the three, but anyway, I had to change trains to Twickenham, and I'll be on the same train as Bath fans. And depending on what day I was, I'll be Bath. They were always a friendly, positive. And I would wear my rugby tops. Like, I would wear my international Italian top, or I would wear my 6 8. And they would always, like, "You going to the game?" I said, "Oh, no, no, I'm visiting my partner. I'm just getting the train up to visit." And I would have a happy conversation with them. They were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They were really an intelligent fan base. Um, very, very, they could have a good laugh. They were a very intelligent, respectful fan base. Every Bath fan I've come across has been respectful and intelligent. It's the club that's the problem. There's something going on there, and the fans are too tolerant of what's going on. I think the fans were actually shocked when the drug scandal broke. Um, yeah, I would say having a limited capacity, or the football club, Bath City not being a very good football club historically, not playing in the football league period, well, not playing in the football league, um, and basically being in a little bit of isolation. Nearest big place is Yeovil or Bristol to Bath. So being in that kind of Somerset, edge of Wiltshire, kind of rural, you're in the middle of nowhere. Oh, there's a little city. I think they're a very isolated little hotspot of rugby union. They they're a little city in the middle of nowhere, basically. I mean, Bristol and Yeovil aren't that far away, but the geography of the area with the high hills and the little valleys, and it seems more isolated than it actually is, but it's a beautiful part of the world, and the people are lovely at Bath. But there is something gone wrong with the club structures, and I see parallels with this with the West Tigers in rugby league in Australia, Man United and Everton in the Premier League in football, Yorkshire cricket, um, obviously in the county championship, a whole host of teams in North American professional sports that bad off-field management, bad recruitment, bad youth policy, poor structures. There are poor. There's no denying that there's clearly structural issues within the running of the club. Now, I'm not saying the players on the pitch aren't trying. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that the players on the pitch are useless. I'm far from it. Like, they're obviously look, they're trying their hardest, and obviously the team is just not at the same level as their rivals. Let's just be honest about Worcester and Gloucester and things. They're not on the same level as Bristol, Worcester, and Gloucester. Let's just be clear on that. They're West Country rivals. They're not on the same level this season. But that says to me there are bigger issues at play. Because Bath weren't this bad when I was a kid. I mean, Jeremy Guscott, for example, one of the best England winger come centres we've ever had of his era. Yeah, the drug scandal is a long time ago. My friend, a school friend of mine, used to play for Bath before going to Bristol, formerly of London Irish. Max Laheath. If you're a rugby fan, check out Max Laheath. He's a school friend of mine. I haven't seen him since I left school, but he's a school friend of mine. I went to school with him. He was in my year. He was in my boarding house. I got on with him really well at school. He's a very good prop. He's actually started at school. He was a flanker. They converted him to prop at London Irish. He's a real funny lad. He's a Jack the lad. He's a bit of a larrikin. He's a bit of a jester. He's a bit of a court joker, really, but a bit of a jester, class clown. But he's got a heart of gold. He's really, got a good sense of humour. He's half Australian, half English. He played for the Melbourne Rebels for a little bit to try and get in the Australian Test side. That didn't work out. So he's a dual national, but he hasn't played internationally for either side. But yes, the drug scandal at Bath about a decade ago, I think, is definitely, the ramifications are still being felt now. I honestly believe the ramifications are still being felt today. I think that impacted the England World Cup in 2011 and 2015, and I think it's impacting the national side and the club side to this day. I honestly believe the club has not fully solved that problem. I honestly believe the issue still persists with a culture issue within the club, and someone like Jeremy Guscott, I think, is an honorary life member. Would know more. And I haven't seen it. I haven't seen his views on how Bath are doing and what's happening with his old club. I really haven't. And it'd be very interesting if someone could just sit down with Jeremy Guscott, man on man, interview on the record, where he just gives his opinion. Like, just sit down and say, look, we're going to ask some tough questions and we're going to want honest answers. And I think he's the type of bloke to give the honest answer. That's I think the important thing here. Because I think Jeremy Guscott, if you were to interview him, would be the type of bloke who would sit down, would I think roughly the same era. Bloodgate was obviously Harlequins, which is, and Lawrence Dallaglio, obviously his early career at Wasps when he was England captain, obviously had his, he claimed he could get you ecstasy and steroids and cocaine, like, you knew people. So he lost the England captaincy before the 2003 World Cup. I think about 99, 2000. But these were all about a decade ago, and Lawrence Dallaglio was about 20 years ago. And it did cost him the England captaincy. So there are questions to be asked about the elite culture, so the elitist, privileged culture. That's the word, privileged. In regards to rugby union, it's a stereotype. There's a lot of working class lads or non-privately educated, so state educated lads and ladies who do play the game. So let's bear that in mind. But I don't think Bath Rugby Club has fully recovered from Cocaine Gate, as I'm going to call it. And it did have an impact on Matt Stevens' career, and other players as well were suspended. But he was the one who was in the press getting thrown under the bus by the RFU and the drugs testers and all that. And he suffered as a result. Like, he obviously had an issue, wasn't being looked after by the club, or the club were clearly aware of the culture, because that doesn't go unnoticed by higher management. I've covered. I've discussed, I think, football enough in recent live streams to go. I want to give it a bit of a break. I understand, obviously, we've got these friendlies coming up, this little international break. I understand the FA Cup quarterfinals at the weekend, and so obviously discussing football. I'm more interested in some young Blackburn players getting. There's a young Blackburn player getting called up to the under 20s, um, and seeing the development of the club I support. And how we are better than what we were last season. We're ahead of where we were last season. I think we've overachieved this season. Um, I'm suddenly reinvested in my club again. Um, at the same time, again, with England's selection policy with football, it comes down to the fashionable, unfashionable. I mean, how Ward Prowse is not getting selected more often for England baffles me. Absolutely baffles me. He's a leader at Southampton. He's club captain, dead ball specialist. His open field passing is second to none. He can rake a ball 50, 60 yards cross field. He can really unlock a defence with a long ball. How he's not more often used by Southgate, really. He's a club captain. The team are doing reasonably well this season. They're on a good run of form. Yeah, okay, they lost against Man City, but most teams have lost against that Man City side at the weekend. Southampton had them on the ropes for 60 minutes and could have had a couple of goals themselves rather than just the one. I mean, that shot that hits the post early in the first couple of minutes goes in. It's different. Man City have to come out and play then. They're on the back foot. So they really gave Man City a game. How he's not in the side baffles me. Is it because he plays for an unfashionable? How Fraser Forster's not getting called up, considering that Jordan Pickford's having an absolute. Jordan Pickford at the weekend was atrocious. His rebound control was terrible. Um, how Pickford's still getting selected is beyond me. Absolutely beyond me. How Fraser Forster is not getting called up to the main squad is just ridiculous. You know, like Ben Foster. How are these more experienced, quality level goalkeepers not getting a call up to just be a bit more of a guiding hand for some of these younger guys coming through and experienced, calm heads? It's just beyond me. Southgate is. I don't get me started on the club country debate in football because it winds me up. I think you should put the best team on the field, regardless of what clubs the players play for. Do I have suspicions that a big scandal is going to break? I know a big scandal is going to break. I don't know which sport, but something's going to happen where there's scandal or suspicion. Every sport, every league has one just brewing. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a match fixing scandal floating around in one of the major sports. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a corruption scandal or a steroids or a drug scandal um, about to explode that a salary cap. Well, we've had a salary cap scandal with Leicester Tigers. We've obviously had the Major League Baseball lockout that just ended. I wouldn't be surprised if something's brewing in the NBA or the NFL. To be honest, we've seen it with the F1 at the end of last season. Something's about to explode, big time. I have no doubt on that. Absolutely no doubt in my mind that it's simmering under the surface and has been for a while. I don't know what sport, but a sport is going to have a big shockwave sent through it. Obviously, time will tell which sport is the sport that has the shockwave. But I honestly think something is brewing somewhere in some professional sport. Which one it will be a wait and see. Maybe we'll see. I like Southgate in the World Cup, but in the Euros I started to hate him. I'll be glad. Um, yeah, the makeup of the squad is what got me. We were light in midfield. The squad was not a balanced squad. Um, and I said that from the beginning with some of my friends. Uh, the squad wasn't balanced. I felt it was a little bit too inexperienced. Well, we got the final. I'm happy we got the final, and we played some good football to get to that final. Um, I do think that looking at that squad structure, omitting Ward-Prowse was a mistake because he would have taken a penalty. He takes from Southampton. He would have taken a key free kick. Omitting Ward-Prowse was a baffler to me. And how many right and left backs do you need? We had enough cover in right and left back, not enough cover in midfield. Maguire and Henderson weren't fully fit. Harry Kane, while he scored a lot of goals, he didn't look right. And the midfield was just not balanced enough, in my opinion. Now, yes, football's got several scandals, but we already know about them. We're talking about another one that's going to come. I think there will probably be something to do with Qatar match fixing, probably. Did I say that out loud? I have no doubt there's probably going to be a match fixing allegation about Qatar. No doubt in my mind. We know about several ongoing corruption scandals and investigations. We know about various things going on. I think, yeah, something's a little bit amiss. There's a few sports that are a little bit amiss. I think we are waiting for a scandal to break. He wanted to call up Sancho, but Sancho's been released by his club for R&R, a bit of rest and relaxation and recuperation. That is shocking on Southgate's part. The club have informed him he's not available. We put him on R&R, spend time with his family, a bit of rest and relaxation. What a pillock. If the club have said, look, he's not available, we've decided to have him rested. We want him rested. We've allowed him to take some holiday. That is really shocking. Career 2.0, probably. Wouldn't surprise me. There's going to be some suspicious refereeing decisions. Would not surprise me in the slightest. You wait and see. Some very odd scorelines are going to come out in this World Cup. Would not surprise me. Keep your eyes peeled for some very what scoreline? What own goal? That was a free kick and a penalty? That goal was disallowed? The VAR failed in that game? Really? Yeah, you watch. You watch. I bet you the Rugby League World Cup probably goes off without a hitch. I'm hoping. I'm really looking forward to the Rugby League World Cup, but I wouldn't be surprised if some players go on the piss or something and do some stupid off the field. Happened at the last World Cup with Danny Brough and a couple of the Welsh players been so tanked they couldn't get on the plane to fly from New Zealand to Australia for their last group. Danny Brough, two of the senior Scotland players were so drunk, the airline refused to allow them on the plane. They couldn't pass through passport control. They were that steamed. Tells you what you need to know about the professionals in rugby league. We'll see what happens. I think there's going to be some very interesting scorelines at the World Cup, and some very dubious decisions. Let's just say that. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. It's been a really, really interesting live stream. Obviously, the discussion about historical motor racing really got me interested and excited. And discussion about the current aero package for F1 and some of the regulation changes, some other Formula motorsport as well, and how that's affecting racing and stability of vehicles. The F1 will be interesting when they go to certain tracks, and they're the ones like COTA in the wet. If it does rain, which is a big opportunity, it will. The sections in Monaco going up the hill off the first corner up to Casino, and the tunnel and the harbour complex, and Spa. They're going to be the tracks I'm looking at for car stability, and maybe Suzuka as well, because that's a testing track with some real G-forces. We are seeing cars behave abnormally, and we haven't seen this type of aero style since the 80s when the cars last did this in the turbo era. So that's something that will be interesting to see how the cars perform in race conditions at those tracks, because they're all different. COTA's modern, Monaco's a street circuit, Spa is just amazing with all the altitude changes. And Suzuka is possibly one of the most challenging and physically demanding tracks you will ever see on an international race calendar in any formula. So with this new aero package and the new regulations, it's going to be very interesting to see how the cars behave and what happens down high speed sections where the cars really lose the back end. How the possible accidental collisions. So we'll see what happens there. But thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. And there was a lot of historical discussion. But please, 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 please check out the Tonga Samoa 2007 Rugby World Cup hacker face-off and the match in full because it's a brutal match. I think it's on the World Rugby YouTube page. That is just an absolutely brutal contest. And check out the Le Mans disaster in the 50s if you want to see what happened and why fan safety changed and pit lane safety did change after that. And that's when they stopped doing them. Not long after that, they stopped doing the running to the cars. That was a major change as well. There were too many people in the pit lane, fans very close up, and they moved the stands back and they changed pit lane rules because of it. So they're two things I want you guys to check out. Thank you very much for watching, and I will have some more videos for you very, very soon. Good for now.